We're having just a little glitch with the live stream, so we're going to wait just another minute to see if we can get it working here. Well, good morning. I'm going to start this morning with a couple of thank yous. My first thank you is to all of you. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today. I know you all have things that you could be doing today, but instead you've chosen to be here and be part of this process. And for that, on behalf of the Board of Regents, I say thank you. I know there are many businesses that are being left tended by other people other than you. I know there are many kids, grandkids that are being taken care of by people other than you, and I just appreciate your presence here today and your willingness to take on this task that is Senate Bill 55. Another thank you I want to give is to Molly, who's just walking in the back door there, Molly Weisgram. You know, sometimes we come to these events and we just tend to think they just happen, and we all know that isn't true. And the person most responsible for making this happen, the MVP of logistics, is Molly Weisgram. So Molly, thanks for getting us all here and getting us all prepared. A couple of things just before we get started. Number one, we are live streamed, so we're going out across the state, so your friends and family can hold you accountable for what you're doing here today, and also to make sure that this is a very public process. We want people to know what's going on, and one of the opportunities we see in the Board of Regents is an opportunity here to tell our story, and we think Senate Bill 55 is going to be a great opportunity for us to do that. The live stream will be going until noon. At that point in time, we'll break up into subcommittees, and we don't have the capability at that point to do the live streaming, but the proceedings here this morning will be live streamed until noon. Also, one other important fact that I was told to point out is where the restrooms are. The only thing that I know so far that I've overlooked is I'm not sure. It looks like they must be straight. You all knew, right? Straight back, so you know where those are. Take breaks as needed. We will take a break. It's not in the agenda, but we will take a break after Tad Perry's presentation and before the panel presentation. With that, I'll give you a few thoughts on Senate Bill 55. First of all, just from a very high level, you all likely know that Senate Bill 55 was passed through the legislature this last session. And Senate Bill 55 really says to the Board of Regents a couple of things. Number one, we want you to put together a task force and really look at how you're operating. We want to know how the business of the Board of Regents is looking, and we want you to report back to us. So we have a deadline by November of 2021 to report to the governor and the legislature on 9 specific points in Senate Bill 55. We'll go through those at some other time. But as a person who started this job on July 6th, I can tell you, as I was talking around thinking about what the job might entail, and in the first weeks after getting the job, talking to people about what are the big rocks that I need to be concerned with in this new position, Senate Bill 55 was always one of the top things, if not the top thing, brought to the forefront in terms of things that I needed to address. So I tried to figure out, well, what does that mean to me, and what do I even think about that? First of all, like many South Dakotans, I'm not one that really likes to be told what to do, so that part you don't love. But the other part, selfishly, new to the position, I thought, this is perfect for me. Perfect for me. What an opportunity to learn about the organization that I'm charged with helping to lead at this point. A great opportunity for me. So I saw Senate Bill 55 as an opportunity selfishly. Professionally, I thought, well, what does this mean for the organization? What does Senate Bill 55 mean to us? And quite frankly, I came to the same conclusion. What a great opportunity. A great opportunity, number one, to let folks know, that folks in South Dakota who are paying the freight, what it is that they're getting for their money. What sort of return on investment are you getting for the money that you're putting out there? That's number one. Number two, what a great opportunity for us to be reflective of the organization. We're really going to be able to take a deep dive, and it's not just going to be us in the office or members of the board. We've actually got citizens of South Dakota here to help us look and to ask us the tough questions. Truly an opportunity for us. And I can tell you, I was pleased with our board's response, because while I don't speak for the board on this topic, I can tell you that the interactions I had with board members were, let's take this serious. Let's take this as an opportunity to tell our story. But let's also take it as an opportunity to get better as an organization. So really, if I could summarize how I view the Senate Bill 55 task, the one word I would use is opportunity, both personally and professionally. I suspect that we'll take several pieces of Senate Bill 55 and break them apart and bring them back together, and we'll make the Board of Regents better. I also suspect that we'll be able to help explain some of the things that we do that are either not understood or are misunderstood. I think those are some of the opportunities that we have. So I suspect those two things. I'm hopeful that we'll have a little fun while we do this. I mean, my goodness, we got Tad Perry coming up to speak in a minute. We've got a panel right after that. I think we're going to have some fun. It'll be plenty serious over our time together, but hopefully there'll be an opportunity to have some fun too. So I suspect a couple of things. I'm hopeful of one thing, and I'm certain of one other thing, and that is we need everybody in this room to have this process be good. I believe I spoke with everybody who is on the task force, either in person or by phone, over the last couple of months. And I know there were some questions that came forth on what do you expect us to do? Almost a question of, do you want us to endorse something that you're already doing? And That is not the case. That is not what we want you to do. We need you. We need your minds. We need your experience. The experience that you bring from the legislature, the experience you bring from the business, the experience you bring from being a citizen of South Dakota to help us. And the only way that this will be a meaningful process is if you're candid with us. Make us look at what we're doing and make us look at it by asking us hard questions and making us be accountable for what we're doing. I think that's more than anything else the process. We are not expecting you to blindly endorse what we do. We are expecting you to help us get better at what we do. So with that in mind, that's what we have going. Let me talk to you just a little bit about the members of the task force. I'll go into the introduction of your Senate Bill 55 colleagues. First of all, I'm Brian Maher. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Board of Regents. I just finished my 3rd month in the position. So I told the folks on my senior leadership team that if they were betting the over and under on my time in this position, if they were under 3 months, they lost. So I'm hanging in there. I really thought that was going to be funnier than it came out there. Secondly, I'll introduce our legislators who are with us. First, we have Senator Reynold Nesba from Sioux Falls. We have Representative Hugh Bartles from Watertown. We have Representative Chris Carr from Sioux Falls, and he is joining us via live stream. And we have Senator Ryan Maher from Isabel. Now, one thing I should do to clear things up before we get too much further is, if you remember, my name is Brian Maher. And if you remember the senator from Isabel, who I just introduced, his name is Ryan Maher. We've talked. We don't know that we're related, but we suspect if you'll trace our roots back to Ireland, somewhere along the line, we're related. Also, I thought, how might you distinguish the two of us? And I would tell you that one of us is young, dark hair, a senator, and the other one is me. So if you can distinguish us in that way. So senators and representatives, thanks for being a part of this process. Representing the Board of Regents, we have a 9-member board. We have 3 members of the board who are with us here today and will work us through this process. We have Regent Jim Thayers from Aberdeen. We have Regent Joan Wink from Howes. And we have Regent Barb Stork from Dakota Dunes. Thank you, Regents, for all that you do and for being part of this process. We also have 3 of our campus presidents who are joining us on the task force. We have President Sheila Gestring from USD in Vermilion. We have President Lori Nichols from Black Hills State University in Spearfish. And we have President Barry Dunn from South Dakota State in Brookings. Thank you, campus presidents, for being a part of this process. Now, I might say that everybody I've introduced so far, including myself, had to be here. Legislators didn't have to be here, but maybe kind of. If you'll just allow me that little bit. They have to be here. The regents have to be here. The presidents have to be here. There's many of you that don't have to be here. And we thank you for being here and helping us with this process. Those of you who were offered the opportunity, if you will, to be part of this task force and accepted are Jim Nyman from Nyman Enterprises. He is the CEO. Nyman Enterprises have really a national footprint, do a lot of work in South Dakota, particularly in the Black Hills and in the area of forestry. And we really appreciate your being a part of this process. We have Tyler Tortson from Sioux Falls. He is the Southwest Regional Director for United States Senator Mike Rounds. Tyler, thank you for being a part of this process. We have Paulette Davidson. Paulette is the CEO of Monument Health. I know she's incredibly busy, has great work to do, and there's this virus going around that hasn't made her job any easier. So we really appreciate you having the time for us today. Also with us this morning is Elsie Meeks. Elsie is with the Dakota Funds Board Chair, and she is from Pine Ridge. Thank you, Elsie, for being part of this process. Next, we have Nadifa Muhammad. Nadifa is from Sioux Falls, and she is also a South Dakota State University student, and so she is representing the student voice on this task force. Nadifa, thank you for being a part. We have Hal Clemenson with us. Hal, thank you for being with us. Hal is from Aberdeen. He is part of Integra Cooperative Board of Directors, and I was talking to Hal this morning, and as he told me, he got here late last night because he just got off the combine to get here, and there's a lot of important work going on there, and interesting time for anybody in the ag industry to take time out to be a part of this. So thanks so much for being with us here today. Next, we have John Venus from Sioux Falls. John is the ELM Resources CEO. He's retired and has had a great amount of work in the, I'll just say in the area of higher ed in general, but in the student loan programs specifically, and will bring a great perspective. So thank you for being with us. We have Jim Lochner from Dakota Dunes. Jim is the retired COO of Tyson Foods. You may very well know them. They have a national footprint, and he's done a lot of great work in that area. So Jim, thank you so much for being part of the process. And the last person of the task force that I will introduce is Doug Morrison. Doug is from Sioux Falls. Doug is part of the Sioux Falls School District, and he is the Director of Research, Innovation, and Accountability. I've had the great honor of working with Doug Morrison when I was in the Sioux Falls School District, and for Doug Morrison when he was a member of the Board of Education in the Sioux Falls School District. He also has a lot of his career was as a CFO with Citibank, so he's got a lot of different hats that he brings to this process. So to all of you who are members of this task force, thank you so much for giving of your time and your talent, and we really appreciate the energy that you'll bring to this task force. Give yourself a hand, please. Okay, next I will ask Representative Bartles to come up and give us,
I'm going to yield to the lower house first.
Representative Bartles is asking that Senator Maher comes up and speaks first to the group and give us the perspective of the legislature as we enter this process. Senator Maher. Just want you to know that's strange for me to say.
What Brian probably forgot to mention is we all got kicked out of Ireland about the same time. We were all sent to, the Lochner family got sent to Australia to the penal colony for being political rabble-rousers against the British. So, and then we smuggled our way into the United States. So here we are all these years later. But 55, when I started this, I put it out, if you go back and you look at the history of the bill, it started out as a consolidation of administration between Black Hills State and School of Mines. There was a conversation that had been happening amongst the Appropriations Committee, and finally I said, well, I'm just going to pull the plug and see what happens. None of you, I didn't want any other legislators really on the bill because we knew what the political blowback was going to be and the angst and anxiety and everything that would come out of that. So we filed the bill, and it was really quite interesting because at that time I had former presidents of universities reach out to me. I had former regents themselves reach out to me and provide a lot of different background information and context. I had one president said, look at what Montana did, and then they would send me different articles and stuff about what's been going on around the United States. At the same time, I had former regents reach out to me and say, hey, get a hold of the Gibb report. Well, we went and we found that, and it was actually absolutely fascinating to read that this isn't a new conversation. This has been going around for the last 100 and some years, that this same conversation has been taking place. And so that was really eye-opening and able to follow up with all those different reports and stuff that have been written over the years. Well, then, as the bill started gaining traction and we were looking at different things, we put together just a real simple spreadsheet looking at administrative costs and breaking it out by tuition dollars, just the top administrative costs between Black Hills State and School of Mines, and then breaking that into what it actually costs per tuition, per credit hour, per student. Along those lines, we also then, as we got into it, we started looking at what Black Hills State's budget was, and we got that right-sized this year because as Black Hills State was losing credit hours, and it's something that we need to focus on and trying to keep them solvent because of the credit hours that they've lost. We were then, in the budgeting process, we were able to, because the document we got in the Appropriations Committee wasn't correct, those numbers didn't align with what was actually taking place, so we fixed that in the appropriations process this year, which then led to other questions. What are the other universities doing? So we kind of dove into Black Hills State and got their budgets corrected, and so now the question is what's going on in the other 5 universities across the country, across the state. Then, as we went through this process, then other legislators joined in the conversation. In the appropriations process, we break out into subgroups. We have a subgroup for Department of Health, one for Social Services, and one for the Regents. Well, in the Regent subgroup, then this bill started formulating and changing and amending, and it's the product that you have before us as a collaborative effort between the Appropriations Committee. So that's kind of some history of how this bill was formulated and how it got to be where we are today. So I'll let Hugh follow up with that.
Thank you. I think that's a good history of how it happened. I happen to be the chair of the work group for the Board of Regents and Appropriations, so I kind of have my fingerprints on this bill a lot, but it did come from a lot of other legislators, and we got a lot of input, like the senator said, from current employees, past regents, past college presidents. Some of these things that are on those bullet points came from sources outside of the legislature. And we had a bullet point, we put it in it, and if you read the first 3, they kind of say the same thing to me as I look back, but yet we wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything that this group wouldn't look at for administration. We wanted them to look at all levels of administration. And my fingerprints are on the last 2, but at least especially the bottom one. If there's something that we missed, feel free to look into it. That was part of the effort that we wanted to do. I know that some of the speakers, some of the pre-reading materials we got talked about everything says the legislature needs to fund this more, and I agree, we probably do. But the moral of the story is our revenue goes up about $45 million a year, folks. We have a $1.8 billion general fund budget, and it increases on average $45 million. And we start the session every year with nursing homes coming in and wanting $36 to $38 million. The community support providers that get Medicaid say they're underfunded by $18 million. The Board of Regents comes in and asks for $20 million for an ongoing scholarship program. State employees haven't got raises in, I think, 4 out of the last 7 years. So they're 10 to 11% behind, and I think a percent raise is about $8 million. So our $45 million is gone before we start. We kind of have a balancing issue to figure out how to spread that $45 million around. And all of those causes, I think, are good causes. And we haven't even looked at the other needs that arise across state government when we do that. So it is quite an opportunity. It's a lot of work to be an appropriator. You know, we spent hours and hours this summer on coronavirus, just like everybody else has. And so if we got paid by the hour, we would be filing a minimum wage lawsuit, so we're not even close. So it's a lot of work, it's hard to do, but yet over the years we have helped the Board of Regents. I just looked up when I was studying there earlier, in 2014 we started putting general funds into M&R. Now we put over $12 million a year into that, and that's 41.5% of the money that goes into M&R. So we've actually put a lot of money into the Board of Regents and the universities over the last 6 years. And so we keep trying to do it when there's funds available. We use a lot of one-time money to help you for buildings and other projects. The law school needed some money. We scraped together $600,000, I think it was, to make the law school because their enrollment was down, to hold it where it was for staff. And of course, Senator Maher and I and some others remember that now that their enrollment's up, we'd kind of like to move that somewhere else eventually. But they don't want to do that. You never want to give up money when you get it because it's hard to find. But this was really an effort, I think, to say, you guys need to look at what you're doing. Like the senator alluded to, you know, when we were doing our work group, it came out that Black Hills was adjusting their budget because of enrollment. Well, one of the questions we asked the central office was, well, where's the reduction in other funds in your budget to reflect that? And we wound up getting reductions from all 5 universities and other funds. And I think 3 or 4 years ago, we created a new fund for research, federal grants and research grants, so you didn't have to come to us for authority to spend that or to add FTEs. And we asked that question, is there any federal fund or other fund authority that you don't need because of what we did 3 years ago? And we got another $25 million in reductions. And so that's kind of what this work group did. And we think there's some opportunities we look through, and we asked a lot of questions. We got a lot of great information from the central office. I think we met at least 6 times with the central office, met with almost all the university presidents individually as well. I did. So we got a lot of input into it, and it was really pretty productive, and this is the outcome of it. You know, there's really no goal in here other than to say, help yourselves, Board of Regents, figure if you're doing everything right, get ready for the next 20 years of how things are working, take some hard looks, help yourselves, and we'll try and help you if you help yourself. And it is a struggle every year to help everybody. So I think that's kind of the moral of my story. Don't be afraid to bring something up, especially if you're an outsider. I think that's, you know, this bill's a product of 25 people. And we get another input from you folks, it'll be a lot better outcome than the 4 of us legislators and the staff. So I'm looking for everyone to contribute and to do a good job with this. And I think everything's open as far as I'm concerned. There's no goal to take money away. I don't think on the legislative part, it's just to make sure that it's going as far as it can and that we keep the cost of education as low as possible. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Senator Maher and Representative Bartles. And I would echo those closing comments that nobody has a muzzle on them. So if you don't have an opportunity to say what you need to say, call me out on that, and we'll make sure you have the opportunity to be heard. I wanted to give you just a brief, although it says comprehensive, overview of the university system. And I know in many ways I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I think some of this really needs to be clear. Just what are we talking about when we're talking about the Board of Regents? The Board of Regents governs our 6 state universities, our public universities, the School for the Deaf, and the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. The study required under Senate Bill 55 is confined to our public universities. So our 2 special schools are not part of this particular reflection. The Constitution of the state of South Dakota provides the authority of the Board of Regents. The framers believed that the higher education institutions could best prosper in the hands of officials thoroughly familiar with the unique needs of each of our institutions, whose decisions remained unaffected by shifting political priorities and who could balance the needs of individual institutions with the interests of the state at large. Today, the Board of Regents recognizes that the successful governance and the coordination of multiple institutions, each with a distinctive, legislatively defined mission, and each with distinct local constituencies, is best achieved through genuine collaboration between the institutions as part of a unified system. The South Dakota South Dakota University System, also called the Regental System, consists of 6 universities: the University of South Dakota in Vermilion, the South Dakota State University in Brookings, South Dakota School of Mines and Technology here in Rapid City, Dakota State University in Madison, Northern State University in Aberdeen, and Black Hills State University in Spearfish. In addition, there is an education site in Sioux Falls called the Community College for Sioux Falls and is under the direction of USD, and there's a site in Rapid City under the direction of Black Hills State called Black Hills State University, Rapid City. That system currently serves over 33,000 students in undergraduate programs, and in the last 5 years, the system has averaged a graduation of just under 7,000 students per year. The administration of the system consists of 3 separate parts: the Board of Regents, the Executive Director, and the institutions. Let me just briefly define those 3 pieces of that administrative puzzle. First, the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents is composed of 9 voting regents, each appointed by the governor and confirmed by the South Dakota State Senate. Regents serve 6-year terms. One of the regents must be a student at one of the institutions. And I believe Regent Brown is here. Regent Brock Brown, our student regent, is here with us today. I saw him in. I would have introduced you earlier, and when I sat down, I saw you. So Regent Brown, thanks for being here with us today. The board's role is to set policy direction for the system, oversees the management of its resources, and establishes and monitors its educational programs. The Executive Director. The Board of Regents appoints an Executive Director who in turn manages support staff in the Board of Regents office, sometimes referred to as the Central Office. And the Executive Director serves as the principal spokesperson on higher education for the Board, appoints and supervises staff to provide independent information and analysis on matters considered by the Board, and executes the vision and directives of the Board, and also secures compliance with Board policies. The university presidents report to the Board of Regents through the Executive Director. And the institutions, let's talk about them for just a second. As noted earlier, there are 6 individual universities in the system, all under the authority of the Board of Regents. The universities complement each other as part of this unified system, with each institution having separate and distinct missions and purposes. The University of South Dakota in Vermilion was founded in 1862, was designated by state statute as the state's liberal arts university. USD provides programs in the liberal arts and sciences and professional education in business, education, and fine arts. USD is also home to the state's School of Medicine and School of Law. The president is Sheila Gusting, who we introduced earlier, and currently enrolls about 9,400 students. The majors that produce the most graduates at USD are currently nursing, business administration and management, and health sciences. South Dakota State University in Brookings was founded in 1881, and it is the state's land-grant university, meaning its mission relates to the Federal Moral Land Grant Acts of 1862 and 1890 to include a focus on agriculture programming. By statute, SDSU provides programming in the liberal arts and sciences and professional education in agriculture, education, engineering, home economics, nursing, and pharmacy. The president, as introduced earlier, is President Barry Dunn, and currently enrolls about 11,500 students. The majors that produce the most graduate at SDSU currently are agriculture and related fields, nursing, and engineering. Our third institution is the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology here in Rapid City. It's a specialized university originally founded in 1885 to support the state's mining industry. Today, South Dakota Mines is authorized by state statute to provide instruction in engineering and the natural resources, or natural sciences. The president is Jim Rankin, and currently the mines enrolls over 2,400 students. The majors that produce the most graduate at South Dakota School of Mines are currently mechanical engineering, civil engineering, and chemical engineering. And as I was reading that, I thought, I should also maybe bring up one other important point. President Rankin, President Rankin, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but again, recently, South Dakota School of Mines and Technology was noted as the #1 school for engineering in terms of return on investment. Did I butcher that? In the nation. So I didn't butcher it, I just didn't complete it. In the nation, not just in Rapid City, in the nation. That has been a trend that has really been ongoing, so congratulations. Dakota State University is in Madison and was founded in 1881 as what we used to call a normal school, meaning a college to prepare future teachers. In the 1980s, the state legislature altered the institution's mission to include not only education programs, but also to provide instruction in computer management, computer information systems, and related fields. The president is Dr. Jose Marie Griffiths, and currently enrolls around 3,100 students. The majors that produce the most graduate at Dakota State University are currently computer science, cyber operations, and digital arts and design. Northern State University in Aberdeen was founded in 1901, also as a normal school to prepare future teachers. Today, Northern State's statutory mission still includes the preparation of elementary and secondary school teachers, as well as other programs authorized by the Board of Regents. In addition, it is the only public university serving the northeast part of the state, and it houses the Center for Statewide E-Learning, providing online K-12 coursework to students in rural areas who otherwise would not have an opportunity to take those classes. The president at Northern State is Dr. Tim Downs, and Northern State currently enrolls over 3,100 students. The majors that produce the most graduates at Northern are currently business administration and management, elementary education and teaching, and health and physical education. Our sixth university is Black Hills State University in Spearfish, and it was founded in 1883 also as a normal school. Today, Black Hills State's statutory mission still includes the preparation of elementary and secondary teachers and other programs as authorized by the Board of Regents. In addition, Black Hills State is the only multi-purpose public university in the West River part of the state. The president is, as introduced earlier, is Lori Nichols, and currently enrolls about 3,600 students. The majors that produce the most graduates at Black Hills State are currently business accounting and management, elementary education, and biology and biological sciences. So that's I hope that wasn't either redundant based on what you already know or too boring, but I thought it was important for us to at least talk about this system that we're charged to improve, and that gives you a little bit of an idea of a look at the system. So I'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is the evolution of the South Dakota University system. As we looked at breaking apart Senate Bill 55 and addressing the issues within Senate Bill 55, we thought it would be important to talk about the history. How did we get from the beginning of the regental system to today? How did we get where we are? We didn't just arrive here today, but what things have we seen over time? You heard the legislators talk a little bit about some of that history, and we thought we should dig deep into what does that look like. So we have a presentation for you today that puts a little bit of a historical perspective around how we got here. And we want to share that from a university system perspective and as a Board of Regents perspective. As you're about to learn, the process we are engaged in for Senate Bill 55 is really part of an ongoing process and of reviewing how we deliver higher education in the state of South Dakota. And you'll see that's been occurring for a good long time. And if you think about it, that makes sense that it has occurred over and over again. I think the legislature, as the legislator said earlier, this is a big expenditure. There's a lot of money involved when you talk about university systems. There's certainly a return on investment for that money, but we've got, as a state, we've got to be mindful as to how we're appropriating that money and how we're spending that money. And so it makes sense that there would be an annual look, and every so often a deep look into the processes of the Board of Regents. In my opinion, it makes perfect sense that we have this deep dive look. So I thought, how do we do that? How do we take a look at the history of the system? And as I talked about, I'm a firm believer that we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. I'm a firm believer in that. So I thought, who can we bring in to talk to us about some of the history? And a lot of names came up. But one name that came up in many of the conversations I had was Tad Perry. Many of you will remember Tad Perry as the executive director of the Board of Regents. He sat in the seat that I currently occupy for a good long time, and his fingerprints are still all over the organization. He's left quite a legacy there. Tad Perry was the chief executive officer and the executive director at the South Dakota Board of Regents from 1994 to 2009. That is the longest tenure of any executive director in the state. At the time of his retirement, he was also the longest serving state higher education executive officer in the country. He later served one term in the South Dakota House of Representatives and is currently the chair of the Board of Trustees at his alma mater, Central Methodist University in Missouri. So here to give us a historical perspective, it is truly an honor for me to introduce Robert Tad Perry.
Good morning. Let me get organized here. I haven't had to give a lecture for about 30 years. It's the last time I was in a classroom, so I don't know if I can go in 3.5 hours like I used to or not, but we'll see. And you think I'm kidding? I used to teach a night class that started at 6:30 in the evening and went till 10 o'clock, so I learned a long time ago not to try to lecture for 3 hours, so rest easy. Let me begin by walking you through a series of what I would call circumstances through the history of the higher education system in the state. Let me begin with the early years. It was 1862 when the territorial legislature created the first public university in South Dakota, or what was then the territory of Dakotas, but became South Dakota. This was the University of South Dakota. By 1901, the state legislature had authorized the last of the current public universities in the state. The institutions of higher education had no more gotten started, the ink was hardly dry, when questions began to be seriously raised about why the higher education system was what it was and why the public universities were located where they were. While little legislation has passed to change the basic pattern of the higher education system as it developed in the early 1900s, hardly a legislature convenes without some consideration given to consolidating universities or eliminating one or more of the state-supported institutions. To illustrate, legislative bills to create a single university system were introduced in 1973, 74, 76, 77, 88, 91, and 96. In one case, excuse me, the legislature did close the University of South Dakota at Springfield. That's what happens when you don't lecture for 30 years. In 1969, Howard Kramer, a former president at Northern State University and Southern State College, wrote a history of the state university system, and he offers this comment, quote, "It is frequently speculated that if we were to locate our state colleges today, that the arrangement would be considerably different. At this late date, the matter becomes largely academic, although few legislatures pass without someone coming up with an idea to close, combine, or consolidate one or more of the universities." I served as executive director for the Board of Regents for 15 years, and I confess these issues occupied much of my time and attention. Legislatures of those years considered multiple resolutions or bills, including these: to direct the Board of Regents to prepare an efficiency report, to privatize an institution, to encourage the Board of Regents to pursue collaborative efforts with North Dakota, to create a single university system, and to require the Board of Regents to prepare a plan to close an institution. And I really confess that when I became one of them, a legislator, I authored legislation causing my successor to spend a few restless nights. In 2012, I sponsored an idea for an interim study committee on higher education policy and accountability. It got traction and became one of the interim committees for 2012. Majority Leader of the Senate at that time, Russ Olson, was its chairman, and I served as his vice chair. The interim committee's product was a bill to establish the public purpose and goals of post-secondary education, to provide for the funding of higher education, and to create the Council on Higher Education Policy Goals, Performance, and Accountability. It was a brilliant idea. It was acted into law in 2013. Its intent was to establish a vehicle for the different relevant parties, the governor, the legislature, the Board of Regents, and the institutions, to have an ongoing dialogue about state higher education policy. I was not returned to the legislature in 2012. Senator Olson resigned in 2013 to take a new position, and like many ideas offered throughout the history of higher education in South Dakota, this one found its fate in the forgotten files of public higher education as it was repealed in 2016. I do not mean to make light of this endeavor. I mean simply to point out where we are today comes from the awfully long history of conversations about the nature of higher education in South Dakota. This is a continuous conversation. It has been so for many years. It is why we are here today, appropriately, and it is, no doubt, will be the topic for years to come, regardless of what happens with Senate Bill 55 study. The conversation began actually in 1862. Howard Kramer's description of the discussion of the territorial legislature in 1862 reads, quote, education had to wait upon the issue of greatest immediate interest, location of the territorial capital. Yankton was determined to retain this plum. However, others hoped to secure the capital, including Vermilion. During the ensuing controversy, according to one member, there was much whiskey drank, a few eyes blackened, revolvers drawn, and some running done. Sounds like the current legislature. No, not kidding, just kidding. The governor sent troops to maintain order in the lower house, and that body immediately adjourned in protest. The capital remained in, the harmony was eventually restored with a division of the spoils. Yankton retained the capital, and the Territorial University was officially established for Vermilion. In Vermilion, the university started with the passage of a local bond issue, securing funding for the land in the first building. As other institutions were authorized by the legislature in 1881, 83, 85, 1891, and 1899, each of the communities where institutions were located were required to make a land donation to qualify for legislative favor. Local engagement and interest in public higher education institutions were built into the very fabric of the system that we have today from the very beginning. As Kramer described it, quote, while it appears that in the early days of Dakota Territory, politics had considerable to do with the location of institutions of higher education, when it came to actually getting these institutions operating, it was local devotion, dedication, and sacrifice which were responsible. Thus, today's discussions on issues of institutional mission, consolidation, centralization of support services, and program expansion or contraction continue to raise local concerns, as they have for the past nearly 150 years. Local economies are built around the existence of higher education, and as a famous quote goes, all politics are local. Let me turn to a continuous conversation. Throughout the last century and a half, there have been a continuous conversation about the nature of the higher education system. In a 2014 book about higher education in the western states, the authors noted, and I quote, almost since the creation of the state, public post-secondary sector has been a much studied but little changed component of the political arena. According to a review by the South Dakota Legislative Research Council in 2000, the state's higher education system has been studied 20 times by interim legislative committees since 1972. Not to mention the numerous other studies dating back to 1918. These studies have raised a variety of concerns, including there being too many state-supported institutions, not enough institutions in the western part of the state, and the Board of Regents not having a professional staff. End of quote. Among these studies are several that were conducted by under the authority of the executive branch or the legislative branch of state government. A 1918 study was a survey carried out by the United States Office of Education, which recommended consolidation of all institutions into a single university system. The 1921 legislature passed an act calling for the efficiency survey of state institutions and departments and contracted with the New York Bureau of Municipal Research to conduct a study. This 1922 report is quotes the findings. Lacking proper direction by a higher central authority having the whole statewide field in view, each institution has carried on quite independently. As might be expected, there is no cooperation between institutional heads and no uniformity of methods of employment, compensation of employees, accounting, record keeping, purchasing, or control of property. The institutions are engaged in a race of individual expansion without regards to what other institutions are doing or ought to do. As the state grows, unless the institutional development is centrally controlled, the situation is bound to get worse instead of better. In the first half of the 20th century, we were confronted with 2 world wars and a Great Depression. Higher education was left lean and largely unchanged. It was not until the post-World War II era that we began to see more energy about where we are in higher education in South Dakota. In 1953, 30 years after the last major look, a legislature required that we do a survey of state institutions so that a maximum of efficiency could be obtained by eliminating duplication, consolidating agencies, and improving management practices. This is known as the Griffin-Hagen study. In 1960, the United States Office of Health, Education, and Welfare conducted a study of higher education. In 1963, an appropriation was made to the Board of Regents for a study of curriculum known as the Davis Study. In 1964, the Board of Regents undertook a study including the 10-year projections of institutional needs, which is known as the Myers Study. When you review these studies of the 50s and the early 1960s, you find similar recommendations. They all read pretty much the same. Common threads that run throughout these reports include 1, a stronger higher education executive, 2, a single university, 3, program consolidation in pharmacy, geology, nursing, and medicine, 4, establish junior colleges at the smaller campuses, 5, reduce small classes, 6, have programs only where there are sizable concentrations of students, 7, coordinate extension programs, 8, combine the School of Mines and Technology with Black Hills State University, and 9, combine what was USD Springfield, Dakota State, and the University of South Dakota into a single university. Let me move to a discussion about strong central office. It is in the last 65 years when the state instituted a strong central office function for the Board of Regents. It began with a 1955 legislative act creating the office of the Executive Secretary for the Board of Regents. This was one of the recommendations from the Griffin-Hagen report that I mentioned earlier. Changing from a structure primarily local and institutionally centered to one with a state or system focus was not easy. It was not a new idea, however, as can be attested to going back to Governor Lewis Church's final address to the final territorial legislature in 1889. This was at a time when institutions had their own board of trustees. Let me quote Church. The law that requires a majority of any number of trustees for our public institutions to be appointed from the county where the institution is located should be so amended and abrogate such requirement. The result of the law localizes many of our institutions and deprives them of their territorial character of management. Our institutions are not only localized, but controlled by local influences, and too often to the detriment of good financial management. The control of our institutions should be purely territorial in character, and the administration of the affairs of the same would hereby be improved and cheapened. End of quote. In the late 1950s and the early 1960s, we saw a struggle of how to convert from an institutional local-centric orientation to a state-level orientation. In 1968, the legislature created the Office of the Commissioner for Higher Education. The Office of that Commissioner of Higher Education was assigned 3 tasks. 1, to prepare master plans for academic and facilities for the system. 2, to be responsible for the maintenance of modern uniform systems of accounting and record keeping at all institutions. And 3, to be the principal representative of the public higher education and the board in all appearances before the legislature, including their committees and the governor. You've heard the Gibb report mentioned. The Commissioner for Higher Education that was hired following that 1968 legislative act was Richard Gibb. Richard Gibb prepared the report and presented it in 1970, 50 years ago. The report came after a year-long study involving 139 different individuals and obviously thousands of hours of work. In the Gibb report, there are 63 recommendations. I'm not going to give you all 63, but let me share a number of those with you because I think they may be pertinent to your discussions. One, there are too many programs on various campuses with low enrollment which are of questionable quality. Two, credit received from any institution should be acceptable at any other institution. Three, a common system of course numbering should be developed. Four, the number of state colleges and universities should be decreased from 7 to 4. 5, there should be a single comprehensive state college for Western South Dakota. 6, Southern State College, USD Springfield to some, should become a branch of the University of South Dakota. Done. 7, Dakota State University should become a branch of South Dakota State University. 8, there are too many courses with 10 or fewer students. 9, each of the campuses should develop a uniqueness or exceptional strong in certain areas, centers of excellence. 10, legislatures should provide more money, to use a comment, more money for higher education, and higher education must consolidate programs in order to assist with financial problems. And 11, there should be one college of engineering. Following the Gibb report, institutional and community reactions pushed back on many of the recommendations and certainly pushed back on the idea of a strong state central orientation. Among the reactions, the legislature passed legislation that retained 2 colleges of engineering, took a legislative act to retain 2 colleges of engineering, and the legislature passed a law retitling the office of the Commissioner of Higher Education back to the Executive Director title. So that's how we got our title, Brian, of who we are. It is recalled that Richard Gibb was almost run out of the state for suggesting closing an institution. A side footnote, he left the state. I don't know if he was run out or not, but I found him in Indiana when I was a young department head trying to expand and mission creep the services of the political science department at Ball State University. Dick Gibb was the commissioner for higher education for whom I had to get approval for my expansion. So he was alive and well after people got through with him in South Dakota. Let's talk about the professional executive orientation. From the mid-1970s into the 1980s, there was a void of strong leadership at the state level. It was the Regents in 1988-89 who chose to bring in a professional executive. And I used the work of Marilyn Foley, who was the Vice President for Business Affairs at Dakota State, in her work, Governing Board's Evolution to Effectiveness. Foley wrote, "The decision to hire an executive search firm to assist with filling the vacancy in leadership was the simple decision that changed the direction of the entire regental system. The search firm, upon surveying the different constituent groups, board members, legislators, governor's office presidents, board staff, and even the incumbent executive, had this to say, quote, "This will be a difficult search. The perceptions of the executive director's desired role held by the Board of Regents as well as other constituencies are of such diversity to provide for the potential failure of any candidate." The consultants recommended a strong executive director's position that would address the need for more cooperation among the campuses and a board system-wide perspective. To be clear, a strong executive director orientation includes having a strong board staff. Hal Todd, an experienced system administrator from Tennessee, was selected and took the position with the following understandings. First, the executive director would chair the meetings of the presidents, and the presidents would not vote on actions. This role had been shared among the campus executives in the past who set the agenda and determined actions to be taken. The change provided for a level of coordination and institutional accountability that had been missing in the governance structure. Without this, Todd felt moving the system forward was not possible. Second condition was for the board to symbolically underscore the role of the executive director as the chief executive officer for the system by paying him at least $1 more than the highest paid president. During Todd's 5-year tenure, the system made significant gains in installing system policies, operational procedures. Policy decisions were done through a series of institutional councils, including the presidents, the academic officers, the business officers, the student affairs officers. What had been a practice of setting the board agenda by collecting the different campus initiatives was replaced by an agenda set by the executive director. As fully reported, the board office is not a clerk role. This office board is a policy management leadership role, and that is what the board expects of it, end quote. Todd's work with the governor's office and the legislature underscored that he was the spokesperson for the system. Advancing institutional agendas outside the regental system process was no longer acceptable. Todd's tenure was the first installment in a system orientation. Gaining efficiency comes when a system orientation and process exist. That's what I inherited when I became the executive director in 1994. The Board of Regents made it very clear to me when I was hired, we want a system approach. But the board also wanted this done in a manner that institutions had a voice in the decision process, and they wanted the presidents to manage their institutions. Thus, I saw my role as setting the framework for the work of the institutions, not doing the work. Before I lay out issues that are directly related to the task before you, I want to underscore the importance of longevity in moving an agenda. Organizations by their very nature are conservative. It's true of the legislature, it's true of businesses, and it's certainly true of higher education institutions. Change is done incrementally. Being able to work with a board and staff with a consistent approach for 15 years made it possible to make changes. You can move the ship a degree each year, and after several years, you will have changed significantly the direction of the ship. There have been references to the Gibb report of over the last 50 years. A number of the recommendations from the Gibb report were achieved in the 20 years that Hal Todd and I served as the leaders of the regental system. It was not forgotten. I want to share with you the experiences that I had from 1994 to the end of the first decade in the new century. And there are 4 things that I think highlight the actions of the Board of Regents during those years. Reinvestment through efficiencies program, the Pew Round Tables, the unified system of public higher education, and the opportunities for South Dakota report. My first session in working with the South Dakota legislature in 1995, there were 2 Senate concurrent resolutions passed, which encouraged the board, quote, to adopt a long-term plan to support efficiencies at all institutions under its control and to continue its examination of feasible procedures to reduce the total cost of higher education through the consolidation of programs and services and the utilization of distance learning and other interinstitutional cooperation and sharing of system resources. Sound familiar, Brian? The result of this work was the Reinvestment Through Efficiencies Program. Established in agreement with Governor Bill Janklow, the program redirected 10% of base budgets to higher priority needs. These were not cuts in funding for the residential system. These were redirected reallocation of funds to higher priority needs. This commitment recognized that we were in a system that was already underfunded when you compared it to any other national data on system resources. We undertook the reinvestment program by looking at 13 focused areas in administration and academics. And through the result of those reviews, there are several results that we made recommendations on. Let me review some of those with you. 1, changes in personnel, purchasing, construction management, accounting, and computing were recommended so that we would save almost $2 million in resource efficiency by eliminating duplication with state agencies. This required legislation to be passed to make it happen. And I report to you that we failed to get that legislation passed on that recommendation. 2, we identified 64 business practices that would result in cost avoidance or some form of productivity gains. 3, we established a new minimum class size policy that impacted 581 low enrolled class sections across the system. 4, we set a goal to share 24 courses among the institutions in the fields of engineering, physics, French, and Spanish. 5, we established university areas of focus in business and engineering. Let me illustrate. In engineering, South Dakota State was to focus in civil engineering. South Dakota State was to focus on hydraulics, while mines was to focus on environment and materials. In electrical engineering, State was to focus on power systems, while mines focused upon digital communication systems. In mechanical engineering, State was to focus on thermal science and heat, while mines focused on controls and manufacturing system. In the business curriculum, Black Hills was to focus on tourism and travel industry management, Northern on international business, Dakota State on business information systems, and the university on entrepreneurship and accounting. The reinvestment portion of this program was equally important. It was recognized, again, that we did not have the resources that you would normally find for an institution, and we were not able to put our resources to some of the higher priority needs. This permitted us to do that. I'm not going to give you all the reinvestment outcomes. If you want them, there's a big book that you can look through. But let me highlight some of those that I think are particularly pertinent. 1, in technology infrastructure, electronic classrooms were installed and faculty trained on their use at each university. The number of computer workstations and faculty were dramatically increased. When I got here in 1994, we virtually had extremely limited resources in computer. Maybe one computer lab per campus. It was not anywhere close. 2, numerous courses were redesigned for delivery using technology and distance education. 3, science laboratory equipment was updated. 4, investments in energy conservation were made. 5, a single student information record system was established. 6, dual enrollment courses with high schools were developed and taught. 7, institutional centers of excellence were established, including math and science at Black Hills, international business at Northern, information systems at Dakota State, applied experiences and materials design and processes at School of Mines, biostress at State, and primary care orientation for the USD School of Medicine. While the reinvestment through efficiency program was being developed and executed, in the spring of 1995, the board undertook an activity we called the Pew Round Tables. The Pew Round Tables came out of the University of Pennsylvania This is a group that had gone around nationally and worked with institutions for higher education on institutional change. These discussions had never been done at a state or a system level prior to South Dakota undertaking those in '95. The Pew Round Tables were limited to groups of 25. The initial start in those were with the governor's office, the legislature, the regents, and the institutions. And for 2 years, we had these groups reconvene to carry out the conversation about potential change in South Dakota. Excuse me. Once we got through the initial series of roundtables, we expanded those to include business leaders, agricultural leaders, educators, and every institution held its own form of the Pew Roundtables for its own internal purposes. The Pew Roundtable conveners found 4 basic themes that ran through most of these conversations, and I quote the conveners. 1, how should the unified system be organized as it proceeds into the 2nd century? Is it the current structure something that should be changed? Is it something that can be changed? 2, is the unified system singular focus to be the delivery of higher education to students, or does it have a significant role to play in building the state's economic development capacity? 3, does the unified system currently enjoy adequate financial support? If not, at what level does the problem exist? And last, what developments or ideas in the world surrounding higher education are having or will have an impact on form of change that will take place or can take place at the universities? And do these developments represent opportunities or threats to our system? The Regents have annual planning retreats. In 1996, we had an annual retreat that was built upon the conversations of the prior 2 years of the Pew Roundtables. I want to highlight for you the 5 background papers that were prepared for the regents and the institutional leaders for that discussion. These 5 papers were: 1, a single university system; 2, administrative consolidation; 3, institutional mission and centers of excellence; 4, privatization of higher education; and 5, matrix management. Now let me explain that one. For higher education, this is a model that organizes across common functional units, such as a college of business. We might have, as an example, a single college of business that is with 1 dean, but operates on 4 college campuses throughout the state. That would be the operation of a matrix management concept. I can tell you those 2 days of conversation were robust. The debate was not contentious, it was serious. And we thought about a number of alternatives that we could undertake as part of the system. When the dust settled from these intense exchanges, the Regents provided direction for the system. The vision for the new millennium had as its core concept the unified system of public higher education. From the summary of these discussions, the unified system is described with the following statements. A unified system brings multiple units into a working relationship that integrates their collective resources. Resource coordination and maximization are fundamental benefits of a unified system. In higher education, where institutions share curricular programs and a common governance structure, as in the case of South Dakota, it is feasible to approach the organizational service with a model built upon a collective strategy. Where institutional management is shared in a common governance structure, there is an ongoing requirement to integrate activities in order to achieve the best use of total institutional resources. The South Dakota Unified System of Public Higher Education operates in this manner, end of quote. One salient feature of those discussions was to clarify the role of the executive director and the institutional presidents. These include: the board delegates to the executive director the responsibility to lead a consultative process of system administration and coordination of the use of system resources. The board delegates to the presidents the responsibilities for managing and operating the individual institutions within the framework of the unified system. One significant feature of the unified system was the establishment of discipline councils. They are described to ensure an integration of curriculum service to students and graduates who may be highly mobile, and to ensure that system resources are effectively used at multiple instructional sites through the use of technology. An alliance of academic disciplines should be structured through the system-wide discipline councils by approaching academic program curriculum and resource utilization, particularly faculty. By way of an alliance, each institution's program can be strengthened. Each of the councils undertook the responsibility of ensuring the interinstitutional relationship of curriculum offerings, the interinstitutional development and employment of resources, and the interinstitutional contributions of public service and scholarship. Excuse me. Each university with a program in a particular field were represented on the Discipline Council, and we began with 11 of these. A second outcome of the unified system discussion was the off-campus network for academic program delivery. The summary of description of that, quote, the off-campus network for academic program delivery will coordinate the delivery of educational services to locations served by institutions beyond their immediate institutional areas. With advances in technology and an increasing number of opportunities are available for delivery of curriculum to individual students. Through the management of programming resources available through the system and institutions, the system as a whole will be better able to maximize limited available resources. Integrating the development of courses and their delivery avoids duplicative investments and unwarranted duplication of competitive services. The unified system of higher education yielded many system efforts to manage processes and services across the institutions and gain a better use of total system resources. These include single common student unit record system and database, common course numbering, common course catalog, systems enrollment service center, common financial and accounting system, a common personnel system, a common payroll system and process, purchasing system with designated specialties across the system, common academic policies such as class size, system online student services were established, system common core for general education was accomplished, a performance and market approach to faculty salaries, and last, a long-term system plan for renovating campus facilities. The last major activity of my tenure that relates to the task before you was the Opportunities for South Dakota report, published in 2003 and updated in 2006. I can tell you I spent countless hours in 2002 meeting with every possible constituency that we might have, students, faculty, administrative staff, alumni, foundations at each of the regental institutions, local chambers of commerce, the state chamber of commerce, ag groups, private business, medical establishment, and K-12 leaders. In addition, the Regents, Governor's Office, legislators continued their engagement through the Pew Round Tables that we had during those years. The product of these conversations was the Opportunities for South Dakota report, a tool for continuing discussions and views on what is ahead for the state's higher education system. The policy goals of the report were simple. 1, access. Every qualified South Dakotan shall have access to public higher education. 2, quality. South Dakota public universities and special schools shall provide a quality educational experience. 3, state wealth. South Dakota public universities shall engage in activities designed to enhance the state's long-term economy. And 4, efficiencies. South Dakota public universities, special schools will continue to seek means of improving efficiency in the delivery of educational services. The outcomes of the Opportunities Report include these. Funding the Opportunity Scholarship Program that improved preparation for college. 2, the state's future workforce was enhanced by keeping South Dakota kids in state after graduation and attracting non-resident students to higher education in the state, where a significant portion stay in state following graduation. 3, Quality educational experiences were measured through different professional and licensure exams. I had a regent remind me regularly that one good national measure of the bottom line on how well we do in this state is to look at how our students do with their student loan repayments. Our kids get a quality education, get good paying jobs in South Dakota. South Dakota has the 4th lowest national default rate on student loans, so we must be doing something pretty well. 4, incentive programs were successful in increasing student retention and research. I noticed in a recent news article citing that a research activity that began in 2006 at School of Mines just got resulted in a spin-off company being acquired by a national company. First ever deal for a university-sponsored innovation at the School of Mines, but it just underscores how investments in research take a lot of time to yield the benefit. 5, each university through their foundations raise significant private resources. These non-public dollars are invested in university facilities, academic and athletic programs, and provide scholarships that reduce the cost to individual students. And last, to gain efficiencies, backroom functions were updated and implemented that included information systems for student records, finance, human resources, course management, and online billing and payment systems. Since my retirement, I've observed my successors. It's really kind of fun to observe your successors when you can sit on the front porch and be the critic on Monday morning. But I observed my successors, Warner, Rush, and Barron, being challenged in sustaining policy goals as a result of state resource reductions, declines in students, and student revenues. I hope this overview of how we got to where we are today will provide you with an appreciation of how issues outlined in Senate Bill 55 have been addressed throughout the history of higher education in this state. Permit me to close with some observations that I have picked up over the last quarter century in my privileged time to be in South Dakota. 1, the legislature and the Board of Regents have very different roles. It is a legislature that creates institutions. It is a legislature that gives them their basic missions and allocates the state's investment in them. It is the regents who are responsible for the management of these institutions. 2, policy goals are a foundational requirement if you're going to have a productive system of higher education. There needs to be a clear statement of state system desired outcomes. 3, effectiveness, efficiencies, and cuts are different. Effectiveness asks, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals, and are you achieving them? Efficiencies ask, how can you achieve goals at the least cost? Cuts are simply budget reductions without consideration of effectiveness or efficiency. 4, there is always tension in finding the right balance between institutional focus and a state or system level focus. Recognizing the strong local interest in institutions, and particularly with the history that we have in this state, while achieving a state level outcome is a political balancing act. State policy, make no mistake, state policy is not the sum of individual institutional interest. Those are two quite different orientations. To gain efficiencies with system level activities requires some system level leadership. 5, mission creep is a constant in higher education. I was guilty of that when I was a young department chair. Every unit of the university or an institution wants to grow and be more than what it is. And every institution wants to expand its reach and significance. It's natural. I found much of my role as the executive director being an arbiter of territorial missions among institutions, keeping each within their own fence. 6, longevity of leadership is important. If you want to sustain change, you need to be sure you have the ongoing leadership to guide it. Our environment is not always helpful. Turnover in the legislature, turnover in the regents, turnover in institutional presidents, turnover in board staff, all work against continuity. Much of what has been achieved with a unified system during my tenure resulted from being able to do this over multiple years. 7, when looking for efficiency in any organization, you need to go where the money is. In higher education, the largest portion of resources are spent in instruction and related support services. Efficiencies found elsewhere are helpful, but they are not at the primary source of expenditures. I'm going to leave you with this. When considering change, ask these questions. 1, what are the reasons this should be done? But also ask the question, what are the reasons this should not be done? And last, ask the question, does this change address a problem as it exists today, or as it will exist in 10 or 20 years in the future? I wish you the best as you engage in this continuous conversation. Know that you are joining a dialogue that was started more than 100 years ago. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Director.
Was somebody new to the position, that was incredibly enlightening to me. I hope you found benefit in it as well. For those of you who know me a little bit, you might be surprised that I'm running ahead of schedule, but we're ahead of schedule here, which is a good thing because nowhere in the agenda did we take time for a break. I think we need a break now for a variety of reasons. I know some of you need to check out of your room, some of you just need to stretch, and for those of you who have other reasons, just a reminder, the restrooms are in the back of the room. We'll reconvene at 9:55, at least on my clock, that's 16 minutes. 9:55, that puts us 15 minutes ahead of schedule, and we should be able to control the schedule pretty well for the rest of the day. So I would anticipate an end time today between 2 and 2:15 p.m. So we're on break.
Yeah, I didn't even hear that church service over there until you said that. I can hear it now. Testing. Mic check.
I think, yep. This is a 2-minute warning. 2-minute warning. If our panelists would come forward, we'll get started with the next portion of our meeting this morning.
Are we done with that podium then, sir? Should we move that out of the way or leave it there?
I think just leave it here. Will it be in your way?
No, I think I can sit right next to it, so.
Yep, just anywhere up there, no assigned seating. Well, welcome back. Hope you had a chance to make those phone calls, respond to those texts and emails, and get checked out of the hotel and anything else that you needed to do. So the next portion of our meeting this morning really continues the theme of how did we get to where we are? What does it look like? You heard a very in-depth report from former Executive Director Perry, and now we're going to ask for folks who looked through a different lens to talk to us as well. We've got former university presidents and members of the board to talk to us today. I will introduce them to you. We have with us over my left shoulder Jim Abbott. Jim was the 17th president of the University of South Dakota, a position he held for 21 years before retiring in 2018. Prior to his presidency, Abbott was a successful entrepreneur who owned and managed several businesses, as well as having a career as a practicing attorney. He also served 2 years in the South Dakota House of Representatives. Welcome, President Abbott.
Thank you.
Also with us today is Dr. K Schallenkamp. Again, over my left shoulder. Dr. Schallenkamp was the 9th president of Black Hills State University in Spearfish. She served in that capacity from 2006 to 2014. Prior to her presidency at Black Hills, Schallenkamp was president of Emporia State University in Kansas and served as a faculty member and administrator at institutions in South Dakota, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. Dr. Schallenkamp currently provides leadership to the state's pre-K-12 schools as a member of South Dakota's Board of Education Standards. Welcome, Dr. Schallenkamp. We have one former board member who was ready to be with us, had done a tremendous amount of homework, and then at the last minute had to call and cancel, and that's Terry Balloon. So I wanted you to know that he was wanting to be with us, he was prepared to be with us, but at the last minute couldn't be with us. So we'll miss him and hope that he can join us in the future. Next we have a former member of the Board of Regents, Dr. Kathy Johnson. Over my right shoulder, Dr. Johnson is a geologist, scientist, and owner of Johnson Environmental Concepts of Rapid City. She served as a South Dakota Board of Regents from 2005 until 2017. During that time, she served as chair of the board's Committee on Academic and Student Affairs and served a term as the board president. Dr. Johnson was federally appointed to the Congressional Commission on the Advancement of Women and Minorities in Science, Engineering, and Technology, and is a member of the National Research Council's Committee on Women in Science and Engineering. Welcome, Dr. Johnson. And the last member of our panel today is Pat Lebrun. Pat Lebrun served on the South Dakota Board of Regents for 18 years, from 1987 to 2005, one of the longest tenures of any regent ever. During that time, Lebrun served as chair of the Committee on Academic and Student Affairs, chair of the Committee on Budget and Finance, and twice served as president of the Board of Regents. She is the president of Lebrun Investment Management Incorporated, which she founded in 1988. In addition, she currently serves on the board for the South Dakota Science and Technology Authority for the Sanford Underground Research Facility. Welcome, Pat Lebrun. Okay, this portion of our day will be an opportunity for Q&A. I'm going to ask the first question of the panelists and ask them to respond. If you have questions, raise your hand. Dr. J. Perry will come around and get your question that you can ask of the panelists. So, panelists, you've heard perspectives from legislators who passed Senate Bill 55, as well as a perspective from a former Board of Regents executive director who provided background on how the university system has evolved to the present day. What are your initial reactions to those comments relative to the specific items listed in Senate Bill 55? One at a time, please. Yes, Pat. Are these mics hot? Oh, you got to hit the button.
Okay, if I see a red light,
There
I'm
you go.
on, right? If I see it flashing green, does that mean I should stop? Or will you just cut it off? For me, this is like being in time warp. When I was on the Regents, I had actually read all of the studies that had been done about higher education and spoke fairly frequently about them. So hearing the repetition today was a good reminder of how far South Dakota has come. I was here in 1987 when we started making the changes from institutional people pushing their agendas to a strong board that was pushing a system-wide agenda. And you have to remember that by definition, the institutional presidents are going to be loyal to their institutions before they are loyal to the system. The responsibility of the Board of Regents is to provide a statewide perspective of what higher education needs to be in South Dakota, and then garner the presidents to coming along. It was not appropriate for individual presidents to start lobbying the Appropriations Committee individually for their pet project, because it was a I win, you lose situation every time. And so when it came to the board, a strong board, the board would look at the needs of the institution, the amount of money that would be available, and in what timeline they needed to go forward. And the board always worked to see that each institution was advantaged at some time, but they couldn't all be advantaged at one time. And that concept, I believe, still stays. The other concept I have is that when we talk about all of the different studies, and if you look at cost-benefit analysis, I have a MBA, so those of you with that, you're familiar with cost and benefits. We talk about the cost because that's the business of appropriators, but we don't spend any time talking about the benefits of the universities in South Dakota. And without the universities, without SDSU in Brookings, there would be no Daktronics. Without the USD Medical School, there would not be the medical communities in Rapid City and Sioux Falls that we have today. Without Dakota State and its computer systems, we wouldn't have the same Citibank operations that we have. The universities are so important to making a state that allows people to come in, well-educated people who can support activities and provide ongoing operations for the people who are coming after us. So I would like to hear sometime about the benefits that people see, especially the legislators, and I understand your issues, that you have a certain amount of money and you're going to have to divide it among huge and important competing forces. But the universities provide huge benefit to South Dakota, and I think there should be a little more attention paid to that in terms of lobbying for what you need to do to make there be enough people to buy your goods and services in your businesses. Thanks.
Thank you for this opportunity. It was actually kind of a fun opportunity for me, because when I agreed to serve on this panel, I keep in mind I've just been gone from the Regents 3 years, but I thought I don't know if I have anything to say. I don't remember anything, but I've been doing a little bit of homework, and I just have to do a shout out to the BOR website. there's so much documents, so much information that comes out of the Regents in any given year, and yet the archival record that is there on the website is really a masterful job. There's really key important documents that need to be available for review and for record keeping, and you've done a good job of selecting the proper records and the proper documents and the proper information to have. So I just want to do a shout out. The website, I know even during my tenure, was kind of decided it was kind of an important piece, and I know there was a lot of effort put into that, and that effort continues with the dashboard and other things, and you've just done a great job. So I just thought I needed to say that. But also, and then listening to Dr. Perry's remarks and listening to and reading about SB 55, I started thinking about the university system and what my experiences were. But really, I was there during the implementation phase of much of the decisions that were made in the 10 years prior to my coming in 2005, and Dr. Perry articulated those. And one of the things that the takeaway, my big overall takeaway from my time on the Regents that I think is important when thinking about the path forward and the work of the task force that you're here for today, is to think about the university system as being it's not a static system at all. It's very dynamic. And some of the movement, some of the activity comes from within, comes from particular situations within the state and within the communities, but much of it comes from without, with larger forces way outside of the state's control. And for example, the years I was on, 2005 to 2007, the big marker was the 2008 economic recession, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But it had real significant impacts, both positive and not so positive to the system. The other big movement that came along that impacted the university system, and it's still having an effect, some good, and then there's been some not so good, is the mainstream of technology in online learning. I mean, who would have guessed in 2005, when, as Dr. Perry said, we might have had, 1 or 2 computers in each classroom building, on campuses. Who would have considered how mainstream online learning is today? And it had big effects. And also, and I think this was always there, this point, but I think it took on a heightened significance and also technology played a role, not necessarily computer technology, but technology overall. And that is this link between higher ed and economic development. During my tenure on the Regents, that became really well accepted and well established. And then, of course, the Regents and the state legislature and others have to respond to that. But, and then the idea that the universities had this critical link to our economic well-being was also empowering the workforce. Now, universities have always powered the workforce, whether it be production of business leaders, lawyers, medical schools. I'm starting from the east and working west, by the way. Fueling our agricultural industry, the computer situation and teaching, education at Dakota State, at the School of Mines, and in Northern in their education department, and business, School of Mines and their engineering and science and technology, and then at Black Hill State in their teaching and business and so on. We've always fueled the workforce pipeline, but it became even more heightened, I believe, in those years of 2005 on, because the workforce was changing pretty dramatically, and much of that had to do with technology. And so all of a sudden we had to start thinking and asking our questions all the time. What does the workforce need, and what are we providing, and do they match? And so it was just a constant thought process running through our debate and decisions. And so looking at SB 55, and I mean the question was kind of specific to that. And so, during my time, there weren't any specific actions or really any specific discussion, I don't believe, on the combining part of it, combining of administrations or operations or, administrative programs. There was a great deal of effort in terms of coupling programs. And the Common Core, which Dr. Perry talked about, how we got this common numbering system of all the classes so that you could take a class in this university and it just seamlessly was accepted at a different university, and then with online classing just provided such flexibility. So that was a big piece of it. But in addition to that, there was a lot of really hard work on how making programs articulate among the universities so that you could take your first 2 years at this university, it would transfer seamlessly into a 4-year program at this university. We worked with the technical schools and got all these articulation agreements to try to streamline those processes. So we were very, very mindful of the advantage of these kinds of programs, and it was all because we had 4 policy goals. And the 2 most important, I think, for this discussion was the efficiency one. We had to figure out how to be more efficient all the time, and then affordability. Those were the 2 that were just foremost in our minds all the time. And so this idea of coupling programs and the Common Core was all about efficiency for the students, efficiency for the universities, really, but access to the students. And that talked about, we implemented the program reviews on a regular basis to try to eliminate duplication, the low enrollments. We had pretty hard and fast rules about that. These kind of activities, I think, continually need to be refreshed, continually need to be reviewed, and modified as needed. We really worked hard on centralizing operations, and some of them were like the transcripts. All students just have one transcript, regardless of which school they come, and they can take classes from multiple schools, shows up in one transcript. It's just really a wonderful program that they have. And so we worked a lot on these back-of-the-house kind of functions. And what always surprised me during my time was in talking to a lot of folks, really most everybody outside the university, how unaware the lack of awareness, really, outside the university system of these back-of-the-house processes and functions that really allowed cost savings and streamlined it for the sake of the students and the institutions. And lastly, I'll just address university centers. There was a university center of some sort in Sioux Falls. That has a long history, as does Rapid City, these university centers. But it was during my time that we really created a front door, with kind of brick and mortar in both locations. And that was part of our policy goal for access. Because keep in mind that in the 2000s and there wasn't the first decade, this online technology wasn't nearly as well accepted or as proficient at online learning as it is now. So access was really important with these university centers. And I know there's been some challenges, and I don't really have an answer to that. I think there'll always be a need for some brick and mortar of the universities, so, kind of a front door at these large cities, our 2 largest towns, really. But it's going to take some reimagining as to what role they play in the communities, how can they meet the community needs and the state needs, and make best use of the physical infrastructure out there. It's going to take some doing. And the last thing I want to say in response to this question is, I wasn't on the Regents very long, maybe a year or 2, and I was invited to attend a University of South Dakota alumni function out here in Rapid City. And I did. One of the questions asked of me is that, well, you've been on the Regents for a year or 2. What have you learned? And I thought, just momentarily, and I'm thinking, what have I learned? And it occurred to me, what I learned, probably the most significant thing I learned in that short time was how important the local communities and their foundation, the university foundations, are to the well-being of the universities. In that short time, I learned that without the foundations and their financial support and the communities and their support, these universities would really not be viable because of the critical need for that funding and that support. So I think that as SB 55 and the task force moves forward, the actions and the decisions that are taking really need to consider how improvements can be made, but without losing just the absolute critical support of the foundations and the local communities in which our institutions reside. So I think I've probably talked long enough, and I'll continue down the table.
I'd just add a couple things. I don't want to repeat what anybody else has said, but one of the things that I was struck by in the initial conversation was, first of all, I think that, what's the old saying, trust but verify, verify, verify. That's basically what we're talking about with these kinds of groups, is to continually look at things as to see how we could do better. I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So even though it takes time and effort, I think it's healthy. Secondly, I was thinking about when I became president of USD in 1997. I came from a business background, not an educational background. And I remember being shocked by the complexity of the educational system. If you think about the levels that are involved in education, it's easy to think about, well, you teach and then you go home. But in truth, you have the state legislature, you have the Board of Regents, you have the various federal departments, and you have accreditations of every single college, every single department within the university and college, and every single program. So it really is a very complex thing, and frankly, I didn't agree with all of those things, particularly with accreditation, the way it was handled. I thought it was somewhat self-serving sometimes. But you have to live within a system, and I think we've done a decent job of doing that. And the third thing I wanted to mention is, so often the suggestions that people have about what we should do are good, but we also have to remember what the market wants. We had a long discussion about, could we just have, I can't even remember what it was, could we just have one school that did this X thing? Well, you can't make kids go to a different school because you want them to. So if you label something X, they have a million other alternatives. So it's really important to remember that we don't exist in a vacuum. We have to be cognizant of all these things. And I think we tried to be. And I do think that Regents went a long way towards efficiencies and combinations. As I recall, at USD, we do, for instance, purchasing and accounts receivable. SDSU does the payroll. I mean, for the whole system. The Regents did some great things, and Dr. Perry was a big part of that in making those kinds of efficiencies possible.
Dr. Abbott brings the breadth of experiences outside of higher education to his presidency. My entire career was in higher education, 43 years in higher education. That's all I knew, and I loved it. It was the best job in the world. When I heard about Senate Bill 55, I thought, there we go again. How many times do we have to study? And to the legislators, we're not afraid of another study. It is, here we go again, but it's an opportunity to demonstrate what we provide to the state, to the nation, for our students. And so I welcome this opportunity. I also thought I knew a lot about South Dakota higher education. And then I read Dr. Perry's report, and thank you. I learned a lot. Imagine that. In terms of the first question, Dr. Maher, I would like to address the genesis of this bill. And that was, as Senator Maher indicated, the combination or unification of the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology and Black Hills State University. One report that you did not mention was the early 2000 report study, I believe, that looked at that issue, and it was determined at that point not to combine the two institutions. I'd like to give my perspective, and thank you, Regent Lebrun for saying, presidents advocate for their institution. And that's what I will do in the next few minutes. Also, I made a note. Dr. Downs, Northern and BH was left out of your litany of accomplishments, Regent Lebrun. And so I would say without Northern and Black Hills State, the two institutions that provide the largest number of teachers, we wouldn't have many professions at all because Black Hills State graduates the largest number of teachers in the state. We are also very active in the Sanford Lab and the research that is being done at the Deep Underground Lab in Lead. The School of Mines enjoys and celebrates its distinctiveness. As pointed out, it is the #1 engineering school in the nation. And congratulations, Dr. Rankin. We are so very proud of what the School of Mines does. But it is a focused university. Its students are primarily what we call traditional age students. The classes are primarily 8 to 5, and they do that very, very well. Black Hills State University, the 3rd largest university in the state, something that we often forget, the 3rd largest in the state, behind South Dakota State and the University of South Dakota. We have at that institution, we have taken great pride at being the access for West River. We have the largest number, and I'm speaking of data that's 6 years old. So President Nichols, if I'm wrong, stand up and wave your hand. But at that time, when I was president at Black Hills, we had the largest percentage of Pell Grant eligible students. That means low socioeconomic students, the largest percentage. We had the largest percentage of Native American students. We had the largest percentage of adult learners, individuals who had some college in many instances, did not complete for whatever reason, and returned to complete their degrees so that they could become better at their jobs, that they could get promoted, that they could start businesses, whatever, so they can contribute to the state. We also had the largest percentage of first-generation students. That meant, in many regards, we also had the most at-risk population of students in the state. I am so proud of what Black Hills State has done for our students and for primarily Western South Dakota, because that's where while we draw students from every county in the state, primarily Western South Dakota. We are very different universities. And for that, I think that our distinctive niches are so important to recognize and to celebrate, that we make a difference for this state and for our region in particular.
Let me first ask if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question.
Can you hear me from here? Is this all right? I'll just try to be loud. I'll use my best lecture voice.
Go ahead.
Microphone is coming.
We're live streaming.
Thank you. Is that better? Good. Reynold Neseba, from State Senator from District 15. Just how would you describe the relationship between the legislature, the Board of Regents, and the faculty and staff at our regential institutions?
I'll go first. We'll go in reverse order. The faculty and staff, I would say, are focused on doing their jobs. That is teaching and serving the students. They are impacted by the legislature, they are impacted by the regents, but in terms of the relationship, I'm not sure it's something that they think about day in and day out. What they think about is teaching, research, service, addressing the needs of the students.
You know, it's been a long time since I was on the Board of Regents, but initially, when the discipline councils were set up and people in the different disciplines then were required to work with people in the same disciplines across the system. And there was a great deal of anxiety about the discipline councils because people believed that someone was going to take away, I would take away Kathy's autonomy and take it for myself. But that wasn't the case, and it was interesting to me that by the time I left the Regents and I attended the final leaders of all the discipline council meetings, they all said, "Thank you, Regents, for setting up the discipline councils. It has made a big difference for us to be able to talk with the faculty and the instructors in our disciplines all across the system." So from that standpoint, it really worked well. And after the initial reluctance to do it, you know, people found that it was useful. So that's a good sign when they said those statements without being prompted.
You know, I'll just add that I kind of agree with Dr. Schallenkamp that in terms of faculty and staff, they do their jobs. But I will say that this is one of the nice examples of South Dakota being a small state. Like, for example, living out here, I know faculty and staff from School of Mines and at Black Hills, and I know members of the legislature and have that are kind of local. And I see sometimes there's relationships built between individual legislators and individual regents and individual faculty and staff that live in the same community, let's say. And so even though I think that oftentimes the universities folks use that, you know, they view the regents as well as the legislature as being kind of abstract. You know, it's the legislature or it's the regents. But I do think that there is a lot of that going on in South Dakota where you get acquainted on an individual basis in your community, and that is very powerful in terms of kind of coloring the overall more abstract relationship. So I just encourage legislators to, you know, get acquainted with the faculty and staff and university people in your community, and I encourage the university people to kind of reciprocate that, because it can really be an important force, if you will, in helping those relationships.
I remember one of my favorite professors at USD when I was an undergraduate, Alan Clem, used to say that where you stand is generally speaking a function of where you sit. And the essence of that comment is that all three of those groups come from different perspectives. And it's important for each one of those groups to understand the perspective of the other. And too often we don't do that because we immediately see what it does to us, what it causes for us, and we don't see all of the other factors. And one of the great things about a meeting such as this is we have an opportunity to talk about some of those things. Most of the issues are much more complex on the business side than the faculty ever thinks about, because that's not their mission. They teach and they do research, et cetera. So I think that it's important that everyone try to respect everyone else's perspective. And I think in South Dakota we do a pretty good job of that.
All right, Dr. Perry, maybe it would help if you'd stand back there and we can have folks in the queue. I'll ask the next question. If you have a question, please go to Dr. Perry and we'll get that going. My next question is, one of the consistent tensions in higher education state policy is balancing decisions that are best for an individual institution versus what is best for the state. In your experiences as executive director, as regents, and as presidents, how do you or how should you balance that tension?
I have thought about that question some since seeing it, and when I think about that, and in my 12 years in the Regents, I put those kinds of tensions and then the decisions that have to be made kind of in two baskets. And the first one I kind of call the routine kind of actions, and an example is the regental approval that's needed for any programs on the campuses. And that comes back to, it potentially could be, some of the mission creep that Dr. Perry Tad referred to, or it just, and some of it is to enhance a program or add a program in response to market demands, market forces, and, there's a variety of different things. And these were routine. And there was always tension because there was, maybe the program was already at one university, and why do you need one over there? Or, that's mission creep, that's within our mission, that isn't yours, and on and on and on. But the Regents, we were always reminded ourselves, we brought ourselves back to what's our policy goal, what's our strategic goal? And it was to utilize the unique missions of the universities, but to keep moving forward on this systems approach, and in the end, ensure that we were doing it the most efficiently. So that was our kind of our guiding principles in which we would have to make some of these decisions. And, and granted, sometimes the competitive spirits, got a little, noisy. But in the end, we made decisions, and we had reasons for it, and we generally went away as friends. And so I think that really worked pretty well. The other type of policy decisions that I think are these big policy decisions, and one that really was during my time, and I still think about it, was made in 2011, and it was done to reduce the number of base credit hours required for graduation. Up at that point, South Dakota had 128 credit hours for graduation. We were out of step. We were one of 3 states that did not have 120 credit hours for graduation. And this caused some competitive disadvantage for the students in South Dakota. You go to North Dakota and get the same degree for, only have to take and pay for 120 credit hours, and some other states. But the universities were not so sure about this because it represented loss of revenue, where they lost 8 credit hours at a minimum of revenue from each student, as well as other monies, for keeping the students on campuses. So there was a lot of discussion about this. And in the end, the Regents made the decision to reduce the minimum credit hours. It was the right thing to do. It was not really well accepted by some at first. And immediately, our enrollment over the next few years dropped because we weren't keeping the students as long. But we just kept going back to this was our goal number 1 in our policy documents of access. And we interpreted access by both geographic access and affordability. It doesn't matter if the university is right down the road if you can't afford it. So this was the access for affordability step that we made. And even though the university system financially took a hit, it was the right thing to do. And so those are these big policy decisions where there's tension that goes on between the different groups, and as you said, where you see is where you sit, and so there was some tension, but I still am convinced that was the right thing to do, and the system recovered from that and gained from that.
Well, it occurs to me that the first question that ought to be asked when faced with that question is, what's good for the student? And where is the market? And educators don't usually like the word market so much, but basically, what's the need is the question. So what's the need? What's the reason that that you're doing what you're doing, and what are the results to the student and to the state. All those things have to be considered, and sometimes I think that we forget that there are more considerations than what is the cost and who is going to pay it, and whether it's good for an individual university or not. I think we did a pretty good job in the last 30 years in trying to balance those things, particularly among institutions. Doesn't mean it couldn't be better, but I think the Regents did a pretty good job, and I think the legislature was correct in insisting that some of those things be under discussion, and they were.
Tension is part of life. Balance is hopefully part of life. As I thought about this one, I thought about being president. And yes, what was in the best interest of Black Hills State was first and foremost in my mind, always. That was my job. But right alongside it was what is in the best interest of the state. I never forgot that. It wasn't just all about me and Black Hills State. It was about South Dakota and how can we best serve the state. And sometimes we had to give. And sometimes we weren't happy about having to give. But one of the things that I really appreciated, and just as a reminder, I've worked in 4 states. And I'll talk about this again later in one of the questions if we get there. But one of the things that I really appreciated in terms of the tensions and the balance was the discipline councils, was the process that we went through in terms of making decisions. If there was a new program that was going to be considered, it was first talked about at the discipline councils. And individuals within that discipline discussed it. Then it went to the provost, who talked about it. And then it went to the presidents, who talked about it. And eventually to the regents. So decisions, especially related to academics, has a lot of checks and balances built into it. And I believe that that process is very important in a state such as South Dakota, where we do have limited resources. But it also provides the opportunity for dialogue at all levels. And so I agree, the discipline councils are very important because it gets the faculty out of their little chairs where they're sitting and standing and out talking with one another throughout the state. So that would be my opinion in terms of the tensions and the balance.
Okay, a little history lesson, because I'm old and I was there during all of this. When I went on the Board of Regents, the Council of Presidents, which we called COPS, operated kind of by themselves. We called it the black hole of Calcutta. There was no way for anything that was sent to COPS for it ever to come back to the board, i.e. an executive director who is now the head of the COPS organization. The presidents no longer have a vote, but they are informed, and then setting up all of the different councils, Council of Academic Affairs, Council of Student Affairs, Council of Financial Affairs, and then down to the to the academic councils. So that by the time things came to the board that would eventually land in front of Appropriations Committee, it had been well vetted throughout the system so that people weren't operating on a, oh my goodness, what's going to happen today? It was basically a no surprises system. And before anything went to the legislature, where we wanted to maintain good relations and an ability to talk to each other about what was happening, indeed also with the governor's office, that things had been vetted, that we weren't just, the regents weren't just dropping bombs on either the system and all of its, with its complexity, or on the legislature and the governor's office. It was a real balancing act, but I think it has worked well and certainly much better than when I started on the Regents, when people could drop things on the agenda just by raising their hand, and it might be, I think that we won't have anybody get tuition breaks anymore, which was huge to the institutions then and probably now. But it's that working together and giving a very complex system a way to deal with each other. So that's been an important step. But the cops are no longer the black hole of Calcutta.
Let me underscore that. When I took on the role of the executive director of the board, it was pretty clear that they expected a consultative role with the institutions, and I understood that. I also understood that the Council of the Presidents was the vehicle by which we would have conversation that had institutional interest before we advanced it to the board level or the state level. I can tell you in the 15 years that I served and presided over those council of presidents, every institutional president came, and I acknowledge, with their own institutional interest. That's their job. I accepted that. But this was not a council of presidents who was institutionally driven to their own self-interest. My job was to help them appreciate what a state orientation situation was and how to best fit into it so that it advanced the whole group of presidents and institutions. And the groups that I worked with, the presidents, including the two sitting here, advanced a state orientation in the end. We had some really interesting conversations. And I can remember one time we were working on something, I can't remember the issue now, and I finally said, you know, I'm leaving for an hour and I'll be back. You guys sit here and figure it out. And when I got back an hour later, they had figured it out and they offered me a state level solution to what was a pretty sticky issue at the time. So they do know how to do that, and I think it's important for those who are not part of the higher education system and don't see that on a regular basis to understand that there is a very significant process that's been developed over the last 30 years almost, and it does work and it does get you to a system, a state level. It is not like the quote that I didn't put in my presentation that I found from from a president of an institution prior to 30 years ago who said, yes, institutions have a state interest. It's whatever we define the state interest to be. But that's not the way it works today, and or worked since my era on the board and the work that all of these people have done.
Appreciate the historical information and data because it is very intriguing. But my question is going forward and a little bit going backward. So over time, has the board and the legislature defined a futurescape, what they want the university system to look like 5, 10, or 15 years out? Had you had those before? And then the second part is, to me, that's the most critical aspect going forward, is not looking back at history, but where do you want to be in 5 and 10 years? And then you set your goals, your policies, your budgets, your allocations, et cetera, to meet that 5, 10, or 15-year goal. And then the third point, I guess, would be, have you done classical SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunity, threat analysis over time, which then generally I would typically use, or businesses would use, to then define your future state. So you look at where are you at, where do you want to be, what opportunities are out there, what threats are out there, and then help use that to define that future state. Because I think it's fairly critical to say where do you want to be before you analyze what do you want to change. So that's my basic question. I know that's a number of parts, but that's what I'm sitting here struggling with. So, thank you.
I think that is the most important question of the day. Thank you.
I'll just offer this. During my time on the Regents, we, as part of our strategic planning, we always identified where we wanted to move to, what we wanted to move to. And it really came down to, and sometimes we were rather specific about, let's say, and I'll just give an example here in the healthcare fields. When it became clear that South Dakota wasn't meeting their internal, in-state needs for healthcare providers, maybe not so much physicians, but at the nursing and below, there was some very specific goals as to we needed to increase the number of nurses to thus and so, and we needed to provide, and information technology was another one. We needed to increase the number of people that were proficient in technology and information and computers and so on, to thus and so. So we had those kind of specific goals, and there were more. I mean, this is just, in education, we identified the areas of shortage, and we said, well, what can we do to strive to fill that need? So our goals were really, we looked at the market, really what the market needed, and tried to move toward that. And here's just an example of a concrete action that was taken in response to identifying what we needed to be able to deliver for the state. And that is, we made a real concerted effort to bring back those that have had some college but did not complete their education. And this was really a very strategic, very deliberate attempt. We identified those that were still living in the state. We reached out to them. We facilitated the process for them coming back to complete their education, to meet some of these needs that we had identified, in these key areas. So yes, I haven't, as I said, my term ended in 2017, so I don't really know as we sit here, what the goals are for the upcoming future. I think there was a strategic plan just put out recently, I think, by the Regents. Wasn't there a policy plan? So that might contain it. But I think historically, recent history, there was always a need for what we want to do. But I will tell you this, and I may be getting a little bit off track here, but we got sidelined or kind of whipsawed frequently by what was happening, in the greater picture, like, the economic situation in 2008, 2009. It had big impacts to the university, and so they got a little sidetracked by some of those things that we had no control over. And so I think that it's always good, of course, I agree wholeheartedly, it's really good to have some idea, some goals as to where we need to go, but then always have enough flexibility and enough responsiveness, nimbleness, I guess, to respond to what's happening from the outside that's going to affect, some of the best laid plans.
I think that was a very good question. It occurs to me that we are really still in a world where what the question most frequently asked is, what's the next quarter look like, or what does next year look like? And maybe we should be talking a lot more and thinking about what is it that we want the educational system to look like in 50 years or 25 years, and conversely, what do we want the state to look like in 25 or 50 years? Those are questions that I know are difficult, and they'll have to change because, for instance, COVID is going to force much of that discussion. It just is, because of the realities of teaching now. Maybe that will never go back to the way it was, the same in class all the time in person. So I think we ought to spend more time with those kinds of questions and talking about them both on the state level and at the institutional level. And by institution, I mean the institutions of the Board of Regents.
Excellent question, thank you. I ask you to keep that front and center, as I know you're on the task force. And during the course of the next year, you have a very important role to play. I agree with the panelists. We need to look at what the state needs to look at.
Just to add one thing for the next question, I do think it's true and correct to state that at each institution, I think we did a lot of SWOT analyzing. I think some people thought we did too much of it. We probably can't do too much of that.
Let me take a swat at the question from a very macro view. I think the Regents tried to do this within the regental system, and I think others do it. The problem is that we had different conversations going on. And there's a legislator conversation, there's a Board of Regent conversation, there's the governor's office conversation, and it occurred to me back in '95 that there was no connection. It occurred to me one day when I brought the Regents in to visit with the legislature in '95, and the Regents sat on one side of the room and the legislators sat, and they just glared at each other. There were two different agendas, but they weren't connected. And I had to say to myself, who in the hell had this stupid idea? But the solution that we put in place was the Pew Round Tables, because it did put regents, legislators, institutional presidents, and the governor's office in a conversation that was ongoing over I think the basic group went on for several years, and it permitted us to talk about change and where we were going and what the goals were, and try to see if we could find some commonality for the collective body. It is exactly what I was trying to do with Senator Olson when we did that Council on Higher Education Policy, Performance and Accountability. We were trying to institutionalize the ongoing conversation and setting of policy goals that were long-term rather than each individual year of just reacting to the economic environment and going forward. But it didn't get sustained, and that's the way life is. So, but there is a need for connecting all those disparate parts.
I guess I'll sit. I have a question about a group of people that hasn't been brought up today. And so we've talked about regents, and we've talked about the legislature, governor, presidents. But as a president, and I'm sure you'll agree, you get an enormous amount of pressure from stakeholders, and that do drive, want to drive, expect us to respond. And maybe the classic example, and I'll go back 50 years, and I was a student at SDSU when the debate was held about the engineering schools, and how out of touch the system was to think about cutting out an engineering school. To Regent Lebrun's point about Daktronics, Larson, think of the industry in Brookings today that's dependent upon the engineering school that's there. So, and so from an agricultural perspective, there's been enormous pressure and we have the highest adoption rate of technology of any group of farmers in the state, in the nation, and yet it's been, from my perspective as a dean and then as a president, it's kind of tough for that group to feel valued and maybe understood by the regental process. But I would guess that's true about Citibank and the financial industry that emerged. How do we become more sensitive to what's going on, to Jim's point, in the world, that so that we're in step with them rather than lagging them, which we often have been. And the classic example was the engineering school debate. But just thought I'd ask your response.
I'd be happy to let somebody else take that. Yeah, It's a great question, and I often think about. I thought about this actually, the very thing when I noticed that a couple of the comments that were the items that were up for discussion were combining administration and combining schools, like one business school or one nursing school or one XYZ school. It occurred to me a couple things that we have to think about really is in the future, where will our funding come from? What percentage is going to be a non-state? Is it at about 25% now, 28% of our dollars come from the state? I can't remember. Higher. A little higher? But let's say that's 35. There's still 65% that comes from some other place. I think in the university we raised something like $600 million in the last X number of years, and SDSU and every other school does the very same thing. And when you think about what schools do and who has an interest in school, no one has it in a school, no one has it more than alums. People don't go to a state system of education. They go to USD or SDSU or Mines or Northern, etc. That's what they do. So I was thinking about the School of Business thing. Where would the loyalty be if you had one school of business, then you just sort of had departments of schools? I don't think we've had a new program, now Sheila would correct me maybe, but within the last, at least until I left, I don't think we had a new significant program in the School of Business that wasn't funded by the business community or an interested alum. You can't do that if you're trying to serve two masters. Second comment I'll make is I was thinking about, and I was young then, but I remember it, DSU once upon a time was connected to USD, and then it was connected to SDSU, and it struggled for a long time. Now, look at what Jose Marie Griffiths has done at DSU. She created a vision, along with a lot of help, I'm sure, but she created a vision, and then she enacted it to make sure that that school could have its own special place. I think it's honestly true to say, very difficult to have two schools under the same administration. How does a master be an equal servant to both of those schools? That's really hard to do. So that would be the caution that I would think about some of those things. Where's the funding going to come from? What do we need for the future, and who will provide it? And a lot of that, frankly, is from our alumni and foundational constituents.
I think this is a single university system, although the universities retain their own identity. The money is in the students. The money is not in administration. If you got rid of a president and then you had an executive officer on each campus, you wouldn't save any money. Maybe 50,000 or 100,000 over the whole system. But in terms of the total budget, that is an insignificant amount. And when you see single transcripts, single application forms, common computer systems reporting among all the institutions, this is as much a single university system as you would find anywhere in the country. The only way, if you wanted to make it a single university system, and like Jim Abbott said, people don't go to the university system of South Dakota. They go to USD, they go to Black Hills, they go to Tech. I don't see that there is anything to gain by starting to call the institutions all the same thing, when basically underneath the in-house operations are a single university system. And it's been a long time since I was there, and so I could stand to be corrected, but I don't think that has changed. Yeah. So it is a single university system with institutions called by their own names and having their own foundations and their own alumni associations.
But back to President Dunn's question about how can we be more effective to working with the stakeholders groups. You know, I don't have an answer for that in terms of how to be more effective, but I did learn early on as I mentioned, how critical those relationships are. And it might be that, well, I don't know, South Dakota State, I was thinking with all the ag groups, you might be a little distinctive, but that's not right. The business community, as you said, that funded programs. I think of the architectural program funded entirely by that industry. I know at School of Mines, the industry is very important in funding. I know that, in all the schools, in some of your programs, if it weren't for the businesses up in the Deadwood and that area, and anyway, I'm sure it covers all of them. Those stakeholders in those local communities and the local interest groups are just absolutely critical. And so I guess the only thought I can provide, and maybe I may have said this, is that moving forward in consideration of combining functions, combining administrations, combining operations, you just have to bring the stakeholders along, because it would just be very difficult to run the system. To your point, where does the money come from, without those contributions from all of these stakeholder groups, and I include the foundations among that.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions here for the summary question. And on your documents, it really is questions 4 and 5. Any recommendations that you might have for Senate Bill 55 task force that are adopted by the legislature or the Board of Regents that will impact higher education, not just tomorrow, but for the next 25 years? So it addresses a little bit the question that Jim Lochner asked. From your experience in higher education in South Dakota, what are the most important considerations you think the task force should keep in mind regarding the future of public higher education in South Dakota? And then also with that, where do you think we can get better? Is there any low-hanging fruit that you think we should address as a task force?
Well, I'll start with that, and I don't know of any low-hanging fruit. I think the regents have done a fairly good job, and some of it at the insistence of the legislature. So the legislature and governors have certainly had a role in those efforts. But I think collectively there's been a pretty good job of looking for low-hanging fruit. But I will, in a little reverse here, but I do think that moving forward and looking for actions and Dr. Perry finished his address by talking about some questions that could be looked at by the task force, but I'd like to add one question to that, and that is, keep in mind see if there's anything that comes up to the fore that's missing. Not what can be kind of taken away, but what is missing that needs to be added. And I say this because I look at how, in my words anyway, that the system isn't static, it's just so dynamic. And as I've said before, so much of that comes from forces outside of our control. So we've been working a lot, we've been thinking a lot and paying attention to the market for the graduates, of our graduates, but also the marketplace that the students have to choose from. And Jim Abbott made this point very well. But is there anything missing to allow us as a system to keep up with the marketplace? We need to attract students, we need to retain them, we need to graduate, and then we need to keep them in the state. Is there something missing in our setup here that is causing less than desirable results in that area? I mean, we all know it, I'm speaking to the choir here, but without educating our young people and keeping them keeping them in state and being employed, we have a pretty bleak future. So it's just absolutely critical to make sure that we're functioning as best we can in terms of doing that. And is there anything that we're missing out that we should be doing that we're not doing as well? And I think about, I lived through we all lived through the 2008, 2009, but I lived through the Regents experience, and there were positive things that came out of that. First of all, there was, federal stimulus money and low interest money, and we funded a lot of these capital improvements with this, essentially 0% interest. We were able to do a lot of bonding, and our HEF funds went a lot further in paying back those bonds because of that interest rate. So we had a real pent-up demand for some improvement in our physical infrastructure. And one of the things I didn't really realize until being on the Regents, but there wasn't really there was a major building emphasis at the university, at the campuses, in the late 60s and the early 70s. And then there was no building, except for just a few exceptions, until the starting about 2000, year 2000, or maybe a little bit into the 90s. And then we had all this pent-up demand. So we were able to meet a lot of that. And I think about when I first got acquainted with public education in South Dakota is when I, in 1972, fall of 72, was a freshman at Black Hill State. And I didn't know it at the time, but the education system in South Dakota was being affected by forces outside of South Dakota. Two things were happening that I was part of when I didn't even know it. One, Title IX passed in 1972, and it made big changes in the university setup in terms of their academics or athletics, as well as the number of women that came on campus at that time. It was a real big change that still is going on today. The other thing is that all of the Vietnam veterans were coming back, and because of the GI Bill, which of course started after the Second World War, but it was a big influence. And I mean, at the time, the Vets Club was the biggest thing on campus. Well, who knew that it was really due to these forces, outside of anything that we did in South Dakota? And then I thought about this as being on the Regents, and then when the recession hit, we had really a spike in enrollment because the students, young people, weren't getting the jobs that they wanted. So they thought, well, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to go back and complete my education or to further my education and my job skills. So we had a real spike in enrollment. And then, we had the wonderful problem about, how to manage that. But then soon, all that translated in some pretty lean years for South Dakota. And the Regents went for 2 years with absorbing budget cuts. And we did not increase tuition to compensate for that. We actually took real cuts. Well, the universities had to figure out how to manage this. And that was at the same time that we're still seeing some enrollment increases. But that's where they got creative, and efficiency helped, and we got through that. And now I think about COVID, I agree that it's going to change things in terms of how education is delivered. But, being a scientist, I always think about, the opposite, the equal and opposite reaction. Students are deferring their education now because of the uncertainties. Will there be another one of these spikes in enrollment in the next few years that we saw after 2008? And how are we going to be prepared for that? There's just so many questions. We don't have a crystal ball. So the decisions made, as I think I've said this, have to be, we have to, plan, but we have to maintain some nimbleness in our system. But I hearken back to two things. One, I learned from Dr. Tad Perry shortly after joining the Regents. He was giving me kind of orientation. He reminded me that South Dakota is a small state, and if you take all of our universities together, you have a medium-sized university in some of the other states. So therefore, the emphasis on a unified system that can always maintain some efficiency and yet be nimble and true to the institutions and their communities, needs to be maintained. And secondly, I would always say, well, how do we measure this? How do we understand whether we're doing a good job or not? And when I was on the Regents, and I'm assuming that the data's still out there, there was data available that showed where South Dakota fell in terms of the expenses that the universities had, the actual true costs per graduate. And South Dakota, their cost per graduate was always lower than the national median. So I thought, well, you know, the proof is in the pudding. Despite the fact that I'm not arguing against always looking for ways of doing things better and more efficient, but I always thought we're doing a reasonable job given the situation that in the university situation that was inherited and that was established, you know, at the turn of the 19th century. Or the 18th century. So I just, no, 20th. So anyway, I just think that you know, what's some advice to the task force is just, you know, we don't know what the future is going to hold. And the jobs that are in high demand today and we're gearing up to produce graduates aren't going to be the jobs in 10 years from now or 15 that are in demand. So how do we maintain that flexibility and that nimbleness as we move forward and yet always continue with the efforts toward becoming a more efficient and effective system?
I'm going to let Dr. Abbott wrap up. I understand this is our last question. Okay, I'm going to be a little scatological in my response because I have all kinds of things that I want to make, points I want to make real quick. Out of this study, I hope that we will acknowledge that the universities and the regents have been responsive to the studies, to the legislative requests and expectations. I think Dr. Perry has laid that out, and I hope that his report will be brought to every task force meeting so that you can refer to it, because we have responded. We haven't just thrown away or ignored the suggestions. Another thought is the recognition that we are in the knowledge economy, and that is changing how we function. And I happened to think of that when Dr. Dunn was talking. My father was a very successful farmer. I was very proud of him, but he had an 8th grade education. And he read The Successful Farmer every time it came out from the front to the end. And he taught me a lot in that regard to make sure that I was on top of my game professionally. My cousin is a farmer. He has a bachelor's degree in agriculture from South Dakota State, and he has a master's degree in business administration, and he's a successful farmer. The agriculture industry has entered the knowledge economy. We are so different today than we were even just 10, 20 years ago. I hope from this study that we begin to change the tone of our dialogue in this state, that we begin to celebrate our accomplishments. We respect one another and what we each bring to the table. We recognize, we support, and we advocate for all of education. As you know, I'm on the South Dakota Board of Education Standards, so I have seen another side of education over the last few years. We need this state to advocate for education, to support education, to recognize the contributions that education, whether it's PK-12, the technical colleges, or the universities, that we need us all. And we need to be supported, if not by money, at least by words, that we do a good job, that we're not fat and lazy, that we only do the minimum, we only do what is being asked of us or told of us, that we are professionals and we care deeply for this state, that we respect the industry of all education. That we see education as an investment in the future of this state. And we encourage educators to be forward-looking. One of the questions that I had at the very end of my comments was this, and I just realized that I had written it down about a week ago. This study should be not about efficiencies, but it should be about what does the state need in the next 25 years and how can we best be positioned to respond to those needs. So thank you for this opportunity to be here today.
I just offer a few thoughts as we conclude. First of all, I'd like to suggest that we need to constantly remember that collectively our institutions offer an outstanding education at a reasonable price. I think that's very clear from the data. Our students pay their student loans and they get jobs. That's an important thing. One of the great discussions we're having across the nation is, are we going to forgive everybody's student loans because people can't pay them? Well, that's not, frankly, something we really ought to have to discuss. It ought to have been, and it should be manageable. In our state, I think we did a great job of managing that. Our students pay their educational loans and they get jobs. But the burden has shifted over the last 15 or 20 years to the student. It shifted away from the state to students. And I think we have to be constantly remembering that that can't continue to happen each and every year. Students have to be offered a great education at a reasonable price. Second, I think in discussing these themes, a couple things ought to always be asked at the beginning. What's the educational goal and what's the educational need? Maybe that should be reversed. Because that's really the point, isn't it? It's not really about what's good for the universities, it's how is the university going to be good for its students and our state. And then third, and I really do have to say something about the centers, because I think this is an area of contention with a lot of people, and I understand it. It's an expense, and it's been difficult in some ways. That's where those two questions come in. I don't know much about Rapid City, except I'd rather fly here than drive. But
Well, I'd rather fly to Vermillion than drive.
And I do know about Sioux Falls. 35 or 36%, and I'm not sure I have it exactly right, so bear with me, but 35 or 36% of high school graduates in Sioux Falls do not go on to any form of public higher education or the U.S. military or anything else. They remain uneducated and they're trying to get jobs. That's a huge number if you think about it. 1,600 kids a year graduate from schools in Sioux Falls. So the first question about the centers to me is, what's the educational need? And frankly, I can't think of a major city in any state, that is the major city or first and second in any major state population-wise, that doesn't have a public education presence of some sort, higher education presence of some sort. We need to make sure that our students receive the higher education that they receive just as well as we need to make sure that they receive the K through 12. And I think that that is the consideration when you talk about, and we all talk about as a state dialogue about student centers. Who most needs those centers? And I would say that it's students who don't or can't or won't or don't understand the system, and that's particularly true of students who come from other countries, and there's 101 or so or something like that languages spoken in the Sioux Falls School District. They need to be able to do something, go to a school that they can afford. And we're not doing that. Junior colleges, and I think that's what the centers really are meant to educate at a lower rate. And it's because it's at a lower level, not in terms of what they're learning, but it's the first and second years. They're more general than anything else. You don't need specialists so much. But what's our duty? What's our goal? What's the student need? Every question really ought to be, well, at least consider, what's the student-centered answer? What's best for our students? And then everything else has to be considered as well. But that's key.
Well, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about such an important subject for South Dakota. The universities are very important, and educated people are very important to the state. When you look at unemployment rates among people with no college education and people with a college education, today when we have the COVID unemployment, they're about 10%, I'm going to say about 10 points difference. People with college educations often do not become unemployed at the same rate that people without college educations be unemployed. Unemployed people are a cost to the state, and employed people are a benefit to the state. Employed people can do more shopping. They buy more, they pay more sales tax into the state. That directly affects the state general fund. So you need to consider what happens so that South Dakota doesn't have these terrible downturns where there's no income coming into the state. The other thing, the cost of education has gone up, where it used to be the state paid 2/3 and the student paid 1/3, and it's just reversed now. I think the students pay about 2/3 and the state pays about 1/3. And that's fine for families where there are plenty of monetary resources to cover the cost of education. But South Dakota is one of the few states that does not have a fund set up to provide educational help to students from low-income families. And if you're thinking about what you need to do and need to recommend going forward, some kind of a fund that would help students who aren't enabled financially to get their education and not come out of school with $20,000 and $30,000 and $40,000 worth of debt. If they have that kind of debt, then it also inhibits them from buying homes, buying cars, furnishing homes, doing all the things that make an economy go. So nothing lives by itself. It's all wrapped up together. How do you get an educated population? How do you make your state's economy grow? How do you keep money coming in to the state general fund? There is nothing in isolation. So I thank you for listening to us. You're doing a great job. You're actually doing a service by holding these conferences so you can hear the opinions of people who strongly believe in the educational system in South Dakota. And I thank you for that. Have a good remaining number of meetings that you're going to be holding. Thank you.
It's hard to follow good regents and good presidents, and so I'm going to boil it down to one very simple outcome. If you do nothing else but agree upon a long-term policy goal or set of outcomes that you expect for higher education, figure out how you're going to achieve those goals in terms of resources, you will have done the state a real service.
Good job.
Please join me in thanking the members of our panel. Thank you so much. Okay, here's the rest of the morning for us. I found it interesting as I was listening to the questions, and this morning was really designed to give us kind of that historical perspective. And I heard you, Jim Lochner's out there going, well, let's talk about the future. Now we're ready. Now we're ready for that. Even the panelists, as we talked about the past and how did we get to where we are today, their conversations morphed into the future and where do we go next. And I think now, from here forward as a task force, that's our goal. What do we do next? What do we do for the state? What do we do for not only the youth of our state, but for all citizens in the state of South Dakota? That's now our goal. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly here about the subcommittee work, what the next expectations are. I'm going to open up the mic for public comment. Then we will break, go into our subcommittee groups, and get on to talking about what does the future of the university system look like in South Dakota. So in terms of a framework for the subcommittee work, Senate Bill 55 has 9 specific points that our task force is to address. To accomplish this work, we've divided the task force into 3 subcommittees, with each subcommittee addressing specific points addressed in Senate Bill 55. Item 9, as Representative Bartles referenced earlier, in Senate Bill 55 asks the task force to look at any other possible cost-effective measures the task force determines are worthy of examination. All subcommittees will have this particular point as part of your assignment. In addition, each subcommittee has staff from the board's central office designed to help it as you need information provided to you, to provide data and to take notes during your subcommittee meetings so that we have a record to advance our cause as we go through this year. The other thing I would say is when we divided up the points in Senate Bill 55, the 9 points, we divided those up in a way that we thought made sense in the office, and we divided it into 3 subcommittee work because we thought we would be better as a team if we worked on the different areas together and then came back as a whole. But that's the extent of the science that went behind the division of duties. There's a tremendous amount of overlap from one committee to another, and it's very possible that we'll need to share members of subcommittees or combine subcommittees. We're open to whatever you think we need to do to advance the cause as we accomplish the work outlined in Senate Bill 55. There was no divine providence that I had or anybody else that helped in developing this today that said this is the one and only way to address this issues. So as we go, help us determine how best to address the issues. Here are the 3 committees as we have them set up today. 1 is the Academic Programs Subcommittee, 2 is the Administration Subcommittee, and 3 is the Infrastructure and Ancillary Services Committee. I need to go back to my desk here, just a minute. The Academic Programs Subcommittee is chaired by Regent Joan Wink and co-chaired by Regent Joan Wink in consult with President Lori Nichols. Members of that subcommittee are Hal Clemenson, Paulette Davidson, Nadifa Mohammed, Elsie Meeks, and Reynold Neseba. The Board of Regents support staff for that group are Joelle Lean and Wendy Cavaney. The Administration Subcommittee, as assigned to the Senate Bill 55, is co-chaired by Regent Jim Thayers and President Sheila Gestring. Members of that group are Jim Nyman, Hugh Bartles, Chris Carr, Tyler Tordson, with support from the Board of Regents office coming from Janice Minder and Janelle Toman. The Infrastructure and Ancillary Subcommittee is co-chaired by Regent Barb Stork, President Barry Dunn. Members of that committee are John Venus, Jim Lochner, Doug Morrison, and Ryan Maher. Board of Regents staff are Heather Forney and Lindsay Hess. We will provide quite a bit of time today for the subcommittees to meet. Our intent is that additional subcommittee meetings can take place at your convenience via Zoom in the coming weeks, as well as at our next face-to-face meeting of the entire task force. Several members of the central office staff will be available here today if you have questions. Also, will be a resource for you at any intervening meetings that you may have, and will be there for you in the future. The folks who are here and available to you today are Kayla Bastian, our System Director for Human Resources. Kayla, could you stand up so everybody knows who you are? Nathan Lucas, our General Counsel. Jay Perry, our Senior Advisor for Policy and Planning. And Jay is coordinating much of this work and will likely appear at some of your subcommittee meetings here today as well. Ultimately, we ask the subcommittees to produce recommendations that the Board of Regents can act on and that also comply with those things we're charged with through Senate Bill 55. So let's look to the future, let's plan for the future, and let's make this time together productive. At this point, I'm going to open up the microphone for any public comment. We have several members of the public here. If there is anybody who would like to address the task force, now is the time to do it.
Hi, my name is Sharon Shantos. I am the interim president for the Center for Alumni Relations and Advancement at the South Dakota Mines. I'm also an alumni. I graduated with a chemical engineering degree that served me very well, and I'm happy to serve as the interim president. As many people said today, without the foundations, the alumni associations, and the communities, it would be very difficult for the university or any higher education system, tribal colleges, the four-year colleges, the technical colleges, to sustain financial viability. So as the committees meet, we hope that you reach out to the foundations and the alumni associations in the state to help us or to help you create strategic priorities. When I look at the strategic priorities of supporting South Dakota mines, we're looking at 10, 20, 30, 40 years out. So as you, again, go forward, please reach out to the 6 foundations that support our public universities. The second thing that I would like to say on behalf of our alumni is that although we are engineers, really engineering is the first step in becoming business managers, becoming business owners. Many of my friends from college are now in C-suites in Fortune 500 companies, or they own their own companies in the state of South Dakota or the surrounding region. So although we're football rivalries with the Black Hills State, as demonstrated this Saturday, we would like to extend an arm to Black Hills State, and as we are sure that there are some efficiencies that can be gained between the two universities. And we complement each other, and I think that what we would like to say on behalf of our alumni is we'd like to keep a strong presence of a university system in Western South Dakota to serve our students out here. Thank you.
Jim Rankin, president of Mines. It's hard to be a president and not say anything, so I had to come up. I appreciated President Dunn mentioning Daktronics because I think we're all proud of it, and I think we all know that Daktronics was started by 2 faculty members at SDSU. Those 2 faculty members got their undergraduate degree in mines. So just to point out that there's a little bit there both. But one of the things I really did want to hit after listening to the conversation was, you know, our motto right now is South Dakota's open for business. And the governor's office and a lot of us are out there trying to recruit companies to come to South Dakota and relocate, either bring an office or bring the whole company here. And a lot of times when we talk workforce development, you know, if I talk to Paulette, there's a shortage of nurses. We worry about what are those shortages. But if you've ever talked to site selectors, they're looking about where to put their company. They want to know where you have excess capacity. So as we look at programs, don't just look at the ones where you have a need. Don't just look at the ones that we have a right size. But think about the disciplines that we want to have in 20, 25 years, because we need to be investing in those disciplines so we can get more companies to locate to South Dakota. And it'd be great if we can start our own. That's how we keep our own right here in South Dakota. Thank you.
Dr. Dunn, time for rebuttal? Okay. I'm going to end this morning's session the way I began it. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your energy. Thanks for your talent. We need your voice. We need your minds. And we need your wisdom. So with that, I'm going to ask Molly to come, or either to come up and explain what we're going to do for lunch. But first, before I do that, I'm going to ask you to please join me in thanking again Jim Abbott, Dr. Schallenkamp, Dr. Johnson, Pat Lebrun, and Dr. Perry. Appreciate their time, their preparation for today, and the wisdom they shared with us. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go through the lunch logistics.
Okay. Lunch is easy. It's all right at the back of the room in a to-go box. There are beverages in each of the subcommittee rooms. So I believe you mentioned maybe about 15 minutes, then the subcommittees will start. You may grab a box. The LaCroix rooms are where the subcommittees will be meeting, so you'll just walk down the hall and you can get started there. Pretty simple. Yes, and then at 2 o'clock, the group will convene as a whole as a wrap-up.